for the first discussion kind of thing, I don't want it to be too long, but I just feel like it's good to kind of outline. And also I was thinking kind of it as like a episode 0 kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
So like if anyone was ever listening, or if like people didn't know what it was, we could just like have this as like or even like a precursor to other episodes of like kind of how we want to talk about things.
Oh, I see what you're
and things
saying.
like that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to talk about the movie we watched that we're going to probably discuss today,
Yeah.
that we are going to discuss today. But I kind of just want to talk about how I've been thinking about it, because there's something that I've been wanting to do, this kind of like look at fiction in a reflective sort of way.
Yeah.
Because for me, I do a lot of reading and watching things, and I'm a very reflective person. And I read a bit of like, thinkers and philosophers and things like that. And I love to talk about it with people.
Yeah.
And I love to bring it up when it comes up, in like connection to everyday life. But when I was thinking about like having to do a podcast or a discussion recorded kind of thing, I felt like it'd be kind of a stilted thing to talk about all the time and not really accessible to a lot of people. And honestly, I think when philosophy comes up in everyday life, it's more interesting when it applies to like real things, because usually it's a little bit more abstract. So I'd always had this idea of doing kind of a philosophy and fiction type thing, in which I just talk with people about, popular movies or shows or books or anything, just kind of things that are kind of in the mainstream a little bit more, but like cause you to reflect a little bit. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. And the thing I want to say, and you guys can ask questions, or I don't know, if you want me to just talk about how I want to see it, or how I kind of see it,
Sure.
I can do that too. But my whole thing is, in my personal like studying, and like I'm somebody who grew up like being pretty good at school, like not necessarily like super intelligent, but I kind of figured out how the system worked and how to like, I have a pretty good memory, and I'm a very curious person. So, as I've gone through life, I keep asking these questions, and I've like tried to learn more and more about life and what it means to be alive. And, it naturally leads down these philosophical alleys. And the things that I've heard discussed most, that I find most interesting and seem the most true, is this philosophy as an interpretation of the world. So, I think people go through, or when they think about philosophy or like anything like that, it seems like a very thing that's very far removed from life. But and then there are all these schools of thought, and all these different thinkers think very differently about the world. But I think when people even take a step back from that and think about philosophy in general, it becomes this look at basically an interpretation of the world, as if the world is a grid, and all these people are trying to map something on that connects all the dots, right? So personally, that's been interesting to me to think about, this interpretation of basically this chaos, like noise that we all experience as life, and trying to make some sense out of it, using what limited communication and understanding that we have. And then also this other strain of philosophy of personally thinking that life is a very creative endeavor. And I think that kind of comes together in the way we watch and consume media, and the way we create media, honestly. So my kind of thought was, take movies, books, fiction that is interesting and engaging, and discuss it in an interpretive way where we can like
apply it to real lives.
Yeah, because I think what fiction does is it presents real world and like human situations. Not always real world situations like realistic, but just like it confronts human characters with questions and situations that we can apply thinking to.
We can put ourselves in that position and see what we would do.
Right. Yeah, and when you come out of it, when you think about a movie, you think about like what you are connected to from it, like how it speaks to you.
I definitely felt that in Contact last night. That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Sure. And we don't got to talk about Contact right now.
But that was directly I felt that last night.
Yeah, and I think people's immediate reaction, I think when we react to fiction, movies, TV shows, anything like that, even storytelling and other media as well. Like, you're reacting to something that resonates with your particular worldview, right? And I think about how, and I'm sure everybody's experienced this, where there's a movie that they like and they take a lot of meaning from, and then they find out later that it meant something else. Right?
Oh yeah, that's most like especially music. It's like people interpret it. I know exactly what you mean, and you interview the artist. Like that was fucking about coloring with crayons. Like had nothing to do with anything.
Right, but it brings out this truth within you that I think is interesting to talk about.
And that's why a lot of artists, you'll hear them say, like, once I release it out there, it's not mine anymore. It's whoever consumes it makes it to be.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing about talking about fiction in this way, or any sort of creative thing, any sort of media, is that when we're encountered with life, right, there is no inherent understanding, meaning within life that we can like ask about, right? When it comes to
not a lot of binary, like yes or no's, right? Is that what you're
saying? In like real life?
Yeah.
I just mean like in life in general.
There's like 2 + 2, but
sure. There's some sort of truth, right? But then you can debate what that means, right? That's why there's so many different ways of thinking about life and the world.
Do you find that like a lot of these like interpretations or frameworks, way of viewing the world, do you find that you find those from art? You know, we're talking about fiction. I almost want to spec like science fiction is really what we've been kind of looking at more than any other kinds of fiction. What other types of fiction do you feel fit into that category that have that same sort of potency?
50 Shades of Grey.
I mean, any
favorite, but
well, I mean, ask somebody what their favorite show is, or ask somebody what their favorite movie is, or their favorite book, or their favorite song, or whatever. And I think, why are there so many love songs out there, right?
True.
And I think it's because it's a theme that resonates with so many people, and so many people find that the most important thing in the world. And I was actually just talking to my partner and my nephew the other day about science fiction, because personally I love science fiction. Right, and I just like eat it up, and I find it super engaging and ask so many questions. And for me, I was saying that like science fiction, I can almost tolerate a bad science fiction movie if it asks good questions.
Yeah.
And because that's like kind of what I feel like is engaging to me. And like I love good movies too. And like I do want to talk about, when we talk about movies and things, what makes it a good movie and how the writing is good. But I think to some degree that like the way we evaluate if something is good is more if we feel like it, kind of brings out that sense of like truth in like almost an ineffable way. Like I think, at the end of a movie, we tolerate an unrealistic ending if it gives us a sense of justice, or like if like it gives us a meaning, a closure of sorts.
Sure.
If it's like, even if in the end, like everything that the main character wanted came true in a ridiculous way, if it felt like that was what kind of wrapped the movie up and what everything was leading to, like that, we take that as like a good ending,
It's weird that we always, especially me, we're frustrated if it doesn't have that kind of ending, where things are neatly packaged together.
Right.
Drives me nuts.
No, and
even though I know that's probably more realistic in many cases,
but it's
especially love stories, but fucking, as Will knows, it drives me nuts.
I think that points to something, right? Like the fact that you find something frustrating means that something about this movie isn't lining up with the way you see the world.
Well, I think it's because, like you said, we put ourselves in that position all the time. So we think like, for me, I would want it. You want to be the hero that wins in the end and gets the girl and all that shit.
But I think that would belie the fact that you believe there should be some sort of happy ending. Yeah. Right.
Which is why I get so frustrated, because I'm like, it's too real that there's not a happy ending, because I don't think. Will got a fortune cookie the other day.
Oh yeah,
Panda.
brutal,
Did I tell you about
brutal.
That?
This is too good.
I got like this super happy-go-lucky fortune cookie.
I can't believe this exists.
What did it say? There's no such thing as a happy ending or something like that.
Like actually, like unbelievable.
Wow.
I'm like,
his second one said, "Go kill yourself."
I loved it a bunch.
But even that, so okay, that's interesting, because that is a very simple interpretive thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You're confronted with a statement like, there's no such thing as a happy ending. Yeah. And you can take that and you can be like, that's a really dark thing to say. But you could also, I could see that as a very comforting thing.
Mental adjusting kind of thing.
Well, I mean, like, because if I know that there's no true happy ending in life, then I'm totally satisfied with the life I have.
You won't be set up for disappointment at all times.
Exactly. Right? And I think part of that is because like people see the world differently. So you could see that one statement as like in two very different ways.
I just think there's a lot of fragile people out there, and to be throwing that in a Panda Express cookie, what are you doing, man?
Right. But look at what media is popular and what movies are popular, and like how many movies they have had to rewrite with a happy ending for the sake of like popular like consumption, right? Like people just won't accept it. They don't accept it if it's not like.
That's where I'm at with it, because like I've consumed a fair amount of it, and it's like for me it's sort of like, you know, one thing is that when I watch a piece of content, of course it's difficult to not relate it to other things I've watched. I think that's the first thing you'll do, right? To kind of break it down, give it its bench line, how does it really fit in set. But then like the part that I really kind of resonate with is that if it doesn't end the way I expect it to, see, I like that a lot, because it gives, it's kind of this like a little bit of a mindfuck approach, which I always enjoy. Or it sort of always seems like a creative choice that they're deviating from the norm enough. And if it surprises me, that's what I'm really about. So I like... Nice. Like dense lore, of course, with sci-fi, but then if it really is structured the right way, then it normally is unpredictable as you move through. And you know, I'm not much of a movie rewatcher, so I think that probably plays a big framework here. Like, I don't really like watching things 2 or 3 times. Wouldn't watch them frequently. I want them to be like one and done, resonate like you do, and move on. But that's kind of why I think I'm drawn towards ones that are just a little bit more volatile always.
Gotcha.
Like,
I prefer for the writers and directors to email me and ask how I would like it. And fucking cut it at that. And if that
contact info on the bottom of the screen, I get
it. Every movie would have a happy ending.
True.
In Tony's world.
Yeah.
Like I've been trying to crawl into watch. I mean, there's a couple different animes that I've been kind of interested in, mostly because I was just looking at IMDb top 100, 200, and I'm like, why are all these animes slipping in amongst Godfather, Reservoir Dogs? I'm talking huge movies that are just actually timeless, that I'm like, okay, I guess these sit up here in popularity. I mean, of course, it's online voting. You wonder what kind of demographic they're using, yada, yada. But still, I figured I'd go through and kind of cherry pick after reading some, and pretty impressed. And I think like Cowboy Bebop would be the one off the top of my head that just...
Cowboy Bebop is
little bit of alternate ending, probably not expected, maybe a little bit expected. I don't know if you've watched that style, but I love the ending.
Fucking broke my heart.
So vibe, like it's just so powerful. So I don't know, I think there's lots of power and like utility to using that kind of a thing.
Nice. Yeah, and I think science fiction definitely, it always is kind of pushing the boundaries. And I think at any like truly good movie is kind of pushing the boundaries. And I think what it does is it gives you an unexpected ending in a palatable way, right? I think that's
right.
Yeah.
I think the idea of writing a science fiction...
The choice of how they make it palatable is what I like. Sorry.
I feel like writing a science fiction, whether it's a novel or movie or whatever, it's like it's a really good tool to ask questions and even figure out the answers for yourself.
Sure.
Because like even the story that I've been throwing around with you guys, it's like it's just cool to put yourself... Like the idea of if you could live forever, what would be the point of anything? Or if you had God-level powers, like why would God create any kind of species? Especially if it's going to be a lesser being than himself. Wouldn't you create something even greater? And it's like, even those things, what are the points of those? So it's like, it's just pulling the thread of question after question after question and all those things. You know?
Yeah, and I think the difference between thinking about that and the abstract, as just like a what-if kind of question, and pulling that down into the narrative realm, I think is what makes... I think illuminates it to a whole other degree, right? Because I think that's where philosophy can be very dry, and why I personally dislike like analytic philosophy, because it's just like basically like I don't know, there's not any real content there. It's like bare bones, almost like mathematics type of thing. And I think
sorry. Go on. I was gonna say, is that because it's distilled from the plot and like the choices and decision making, and not so much like verbatim statements and like the way like sometimes they'll have a scene where it's like, you know, main characters meeting up with the young teacher, and they go through this learning process, and you see it openly, like he talks about the change he's making, but like a lot of times it's more like decision making and plot wise that forces the...
Are you asking
what part of the movies do you enjoy? Like what portion of it do you resonate more with, or just all types make sense?
I think for me...
Because you have to have a movie in the back of your mind you're thinking of while you're saying this, right? And so I'm wondering, in those examples, is it plot-driven, or is it...
I think it depends. Well, right now I'm thinking about the movies that we've been talking about recently. But I think when it's confronted with the choice, and for me, I very much... identify and like kind of subscribe to like that kind of existentialist sort of idea of like we are radically human, we make choices and we create our meaning in life. So I think any sort of movie that gives characters either autonomy, or honestly where that gives the creator, like where the creator makes a choice, the person who made the movie or made the book or whatever makes a choice that makes a statement, that kind of like puts forward a value.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the part that's interesting to me. And I think the movies that really I find like very valuable are movies that are able to, like, I'm going to bring this up. I know we're going to talk about it later. Interstellar. I think that movie brings a question up and shows different perspectives of one question that characters engage with in a very human way, and you see them struggle with
do the math in their head.
Yeah, and it's like, I think those are the kind of things that I find really interesting. I mean, there are also a lot of movies I love just for like pure pleasure too. And like those are movies that I love and would share and and I wouldn't necessarily bring up to talk about in a forum like this. And so I think, there's a lot of things out there, and there's a lot that I feel like people can take from movies, and there's a lot that media does, even beyond, I don't think every like movie has to be groundbreaking. I don't think it has to be thought-provoking. I think it can also just be entertaining.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think what we can use movies and fiction for is a way to practice this like interpretation and to understand that interpretation is different for everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, have you ever seen the movie Stranger Than Fiction?
Yes. 1,000 times.
I love that movie.
That's one of my favorite movies.
And
I Brought You Flowers.
That's a weird one. That's a good example.
I would like
That's where you're
rewind
going.
that scene. Just
Right.
like, you brought me flowers.
So it's an interesting movie because within the movie, the creator is also part of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would love to talk about this movie in depth later.
Yeah.
But that's a movie for me personally
That's a
that
different
I watched as a teenager when I had a very particular worldview. And I loved the movie and hated the ending. And like it was because
it was too perfect?
Because I felt like if we talk about it in depth later, that's fine. But I'll say it now.
Yeah. It's
When
not
I
gonna
watched that movie originally, I was so upset that she didn't finish the book and kill him in the movie.
Oh.
I was like, because at the time, I was a young, creative artist kid, and I was like, you should at all costs stick to your art, stick to your craft, like follow through, put that art in the world. And like, I feel like it was a cop out, and like.
But did you ask yourself what you would do in her situation? I think knowing you would definitely fucking murder the guy.
But I think at the time,
it's the same as murdering him.
I was thinking about it in terms of like, this is a movie, and this is making a statement about the world, and the main character shouldn't have like made a happy ending where he gets to live and like gets to be with the person he fell in love with, and like they should just like say like art is what's important in the world, and that was me. But I still liked the movie.
It's more important than a human life.
I think at the time that's kind of where I was at. That was like my worldview, right? That's like kind of what I needed.
We're not talking about the Bible. We're talking about some shitty book that
I don't know, but I think maybe for me at the time, like I was just like so about making my stuff, and I didn't feel really connected to anybody.
Sure.
And I think that was a truth to me, But I still love the movie. Like it just like really engaged me in a way. And I watched it as I got older, and the more I watched it, the more I really came to love that movie and love the ending. And like it came to a point where like that's a movie like I cry to sometimes, like it's just beautiful. Like the end is so beautiful because it's so human, right? And like her line at the end where it's like, if there was a person like that out there, like wouldn't you want that person to live?
Goosebumps,
right? And like she has that choice to make. And like the fact that I think that, and that's part of it, it's like she has that choice. There's a choice she makes that puts a value and a meaning out there in the universe, and like you can decide whether or not you agree with it, right? But like it is her choice, and she makes it, and she has it. It creates meaning, right? And I think that's what I find interesting about fiction. I think it's what it can do, and I think that if we learn and like just talk about how we interpret these kinds of things and how people interpret it differently, I think it can show us a lot about how we interpret life, too. And I think that's kind of where I was wanting to go with.
I guess like, if I had to like respond really directly, I think that most people, they'll react to the piece of art and then put it in set, like I said, like they'll try to framework it to understand. They'll think of similarities to other things, but normally there's like a transition where, depending on like the amount of like resonance that art has with the person basically is about like the emotional related, like how much they can relate with the decision making that's taking place. Like if they can take the emotional journey of the show and really sit in the seat of what the decision making is taking place. I think there's like a level of bias that allows people to connect with the character or not, like as they show up to the movie, right? I think that carries so much more weight than a lot of the other things, especially when I think, especially with kids in particular. I know I have like a lot of younger siblings. I definitely see that they resonate with storytelling so much, especially if it's like an emotionally related decision making event where they can kind of tie to. But I think that applies to like all types of storytelling. I don't know if it necessarily bothers me, but I just think that that's a weird portion of it. And like a lot of the neuroscience that I've looked at kind of suggests that too. Like at the end of the day, like I kind of look at a lot of experiences to kind of function like drugs. I know that's a weird way to kind of frame it, but like, you know, every food you take, everything you touch, every choice you make at some level is affecting your chemistry. And so I think that the movies, like, you know, you could watch something more anxious, more violent, more often. You could watch, there's all these different things that would really encourage your chemistry certain ways. I really do think of them that way. And to me, the only tie I would make is that it's interesting to me that some people respond so much more potently to certain emotional stories, right? They have much heavier relationship, and I think it actually changes their chemistry a lot more than they realize. I see it happen. People engage with television a lot more. It's interesting.
I'd probably stop watching so much Family Guy then.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could think of it like food. And like I've had friends who watch Requiem and like it wrecked them.
Oh, I didn't know if you caught that.
No, yeah.
I said I watch it every morning. Just to fucking.
No, but I think that's and I think that's
violin on.
Yeah, I think we are deeply storytelling creatures. I mean, like socially we are,
right?
And that's why we have such a history of it. And I think it affects us like deeply, and I think that's how people. I mean, that's what politicians even use, right? Is they try and tell this story to kind of get to you and kind of infect you in some way, and the way they're trying to manipulate you, right?
Right.
And I think in some media can be manipulative in that way. But I think, if you think about it like food, that's a really good way to think about it too. Yeah. But in like the daily dose sort of way, you know, like what are you consuming every day, and how is that affecting?
I go a little bit deeper than that, to be honest. Like I look at everything like a drug, to be honest. I really do, because I think like I'll be really specific. I think like marriage, having kids, I think is a very particular kind of drug. I think that you're engaging with serotonin, and you're getting with a lot of pride systems, and you're engaging with this sort of feedback loop between both the child and you at that point, where there's like a huge serotonin interlay where. It's really healthy for the individual. I mean, it's essentially a big potent antidepressant.
In that realm.
I mean, the same thing with religion, though. I think it functions the same way to certain people. And,
and I think this is getting at how life, like you kind of interpret life, right? So like you say something like, you know, certain experiences that you're drawn to, or certain experiences that are good for you, give you this like serotonin release or something like that. And that's a way of saying that like this is evidence that this kind of thing is good for you. This kind of thing is bad.
But not only. I mean, unhealthy habits can give you that same boost too, right? That's why you get hooked to them.
Right. Yeah. But then, I mean, then you look at the long-term effects, right? And it's all this like So like if you're a pleasure pain type person, like pleasure is good, pain is bad. That used to be a way of thinking about the world. Like there are people who consider themselves like Epicureans. Like they try and indulge that pleasure part of it because that's what they believe that like is good in life. And some people who would say that like that taking those kind of drugs are good because they give you that sense of pleasure, and like reaching the highest ecstasy is reaching, you know, some sort of like spiritual.
Did they have heroin back then?
I mean, no, not something so potent, right?
But then you could opium, yes. What?
But then you could, you could dial it back and be like, you know, long term, this is a negative thing, right? Yeah. And then you're positing a different meaning, right? Yeah. And it's like all about like, and this is what the kind of discussion.
Too much of a good thing.
And that's the like pure life interpretation, right? For sure. And I think that those are very interesting topics as well. But I don't want to go too long on this discussion, so we can actually get to
I'm actually going to check the video.
That's really how I think about it, to be honest with you. I mean, it doesn't leave. It's really how I think that's
really interesting.
A lot of data.
And honestly, and that's true too. Like, I mean, all we are like we are kind of reacting and taking in and being affected by everything, right? And the difference between us and, you know, anything else, and you know, animals a little less so, but like just the world in general, is that we choose what we engage in most of the time, you know, and we can, and not only that, but we have gotten to the point where we create the world we live in,
right?
You know, so like we are actively choosing all these drugs we're taking, you know, drugs in any sense of the word.
Absolutely.
So, and we choose what institutions we want, and you know, we choose if marriage is something we need, or if there's something else out there that can take the place of that, or basically, it just becomes this thing of we are choosing what life is about, you know, and what life is good and what life is bad. And I think if we pay attention, you know, and what you're saying is if we pay attention to everything we do, right? But I think if we also pay attention to what things we resonate with in that narrative way, I think can show us something about how we should live our life, because that narrative structure is something we can apply to our life in a holistic sort of way of like.
I'm mostly just saying.
Yeah.
It's one of my biased lenses that I have trouble putting down because it feels pretty crisp. I think it does a lot.
And we can talk when we talk about Contact. I think we could talk about that whole like kind of scientific worldview of how true it seems.
Yeah, I've got a pretty weird spin to think about that one because there's a lot to that. We've been talking about that one for a couple of decades in this country, to be honest. That particular question.
The science question. Yeah.
I think so.
Well, let's get to it. Let's end this conversation, and we can start the conversation on Contact. Okay. Well, let's jump into the discussion then.
Yeah.
So we're talking about Contact, and the reason that I suggested Contact when Tony and I were talking about discussing some movie is that I've recently watched Interstellar, which is a fascinating movie, great movie, but it really brought back my experience of watching Contact and my experience of watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I felt like it was a good background to kind of build up to it. So I feel like we could do these three kind of movies together. And I honestly felt like it'd be best to start with Contact because
probably the most palatable one.
Yeah, first. It's like it's not super old and it's like pretty straightforward. Yeah. Like it's not as like 2001 is a little bit like tougher to untangle. So yeah, I thought Contact was a good place to start. People love the movie. It's a pretty amazing movie. So yeah, I think we can start. I think it's a good place to start. Maybe we can just go and each kind of summarize it in our own way, or do you want to start summarizing it and then we can add in just basic plot stuff, and then we can move through and react.
Just take it away. I think it's kind of a simpler plot, to be honest. If you don't mind. I mean, I think I'd probably disagree. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, it's about this character Ellie, and you see her as a young girl at first with her dad, who kind of supports her very curious mind, very interested in communication and science. Clearly, like a very intelligent child, and. When she's older, I'm not sure if you find out later or not that her dad dies. You find out that later, right?
It's probably like 20% through the movie.
Okay, 15%. Not right at the beginning.
Yeah, fairly in the beginning, but not.
But you find out she's really into communication as a child even, and then you see her when she's older and she's working at Arecibo, the big radio telescope in Puerto Rico that has since collapsed, which we were just talking about. Which is a shame, which is kind of crazy.
Are they rebuilding that, or is it just
I don't know if they have the money to, but it used to be the biggest radio telescope in the world.
Takes a minute. Takes a moment to rebuild. I think that's the problem.
And she's working there, and you find out that she's
maybe they'll get a signal to build a better one from aliens.
on how to build a better one.
Yeah,
but how will they receive the signal?
That's fucking true.
So you find out she's there to research or to work on communication with intelligent life in the universe.
Yeah.
And you find out she clashes with the kind of scientific world around her.
Fucking Drumlin.
Characters like Drumlin.
That's how you say his name, right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah. Who she worked with or worked for.
I think in the past she worked for.
Yeah.
And
he thinks she's wasting her time.
Yeah.
So
piece of shit.
And he is like, he kind of works in the government now, I think. He's a very political character.
Yeah.
He works in the government and kind of controls the funding or the ability for her to use the telescope. Anyway, cuts her funding because he thinks she's wasting her time and wasting money, and he thinks that science should be practical and applicable like immediately.
So she gets private funding.
Yes. So she
from our
gets together, and then she gets private funding from a really rich tech guy.
Yeah.
From what you can
engineer.
Tell, really like eccentric seeming person
who's dying.
Who is dying. He's old.
Later.
Yeah. To work at the very large array in New Mexico, and right before. They're working there for several years, I think, at that time.
Yeah.
And right before they're about to be shut down again from the government, they receive this signal that they verify as from an extraterrestrial
all prime
source.
Numbers.
Yes, and it's a prime. It's a signal of prime numbers, so a mathematical symbol that couldn't occur naturally.
Yeah.
So they take that as proof that it's intelligent life out there somewhere. And then there's a lot of like kind of jockeying for kind of like national security once it becomes like this like
who gets to spearhead all of what happens next.
The government gets brought in, Drumlin comes back and like tries to take over the program basically, and then there's like the national security guy who's involved who basically is just like really upset with her because she's like made this an international thing immediately.
Yeah.
And from her perspective,
as a scientist, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's trying to coordinate as much as possible. And plus, they need the telescopes from around the entire world to continue recording the signal. So there's a lot of political stuff going on. I'm going to gloss over that for now. And then they start to decode this message, which at first is just prime numbers, but then they realize it's interlaced with different
digital
messages as well. And the first message they decode is Hitler, a television broadcast of Hitler opening the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
And at first, like there's there's a shock about it.
Which is, it's factual that was the first broadcast, but it's also trippy.
Isn't that weird to think about?
It's so cool that he included that in the story. Which it's one of the notes I made. It's that in terms of sending out radio signals, I correct me if I'm wrong, but because like the speed of the light is a constant, so all of our signals are like a chronological order of everything we've ever broadcasted.
Right.
You know, which is kind of cool. You can almost see the progression of the human race through time, through our broadcasts.
Through what's
which is trippy. It's super weird. Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of an accident of history that was our first message.
Oh yeah.
That left the Earth, in any sort of way. But then they find out within that as well that there is another message encoded in that signal.
Yeah.
That over time they slowly decipher with help from the mystery tech guy.
And it just said smoke. Like The Simpsons. Buy tobacco.
Oh,
smoke.
The mall or something.
I don't know. I just remember subliminal. They would include it in movies. It'd just be like in the middle, in like a millisecond in a frame. It'd just be like smoke. Sorry to cut you off.
That's how it feels, though.
They start to decipher the message, and they find out that it's a schematics for some sort of machine.
Yeah.
And there's more political jockeying, figure out who's going to build the machine, who's going to fund it, who's in charge of the project. And all the time that Ellie is kind of competing with Drumlin as like the lead of this project, because
that was the most
she was the one that was passionate about the project, and he's kind of come in now that it's actually something's actually come from it. And over time they figure out that it seems like it's some sort of transport, or somebody's going to be inside this machine when it goes off or when it does its thing. And there's this committee that's formed to kind of pick the person that's going to go inside of it. And all along, I forgot to add this in. All along, there's this other character, Matthew McConaughey's character, Palmer Joss, who is a religious man,
selfish douchebag,
kind of a religious thinker. He's not like a priest necessarily,
right?
But he has a relationship.
He's a man of cloth without the cloth. That's what he said.
He has a romantic relationship with Ellie in the beginning of the movie, and she kind of blows him.
She gives it up easy.
Yeah, she kind of uses him, and he's kind of invested in her. Clearly wants to be with her.
Yeah.
But when she leaves Puerto Rico, she doesn't talk to him anymore.
Yeah.
But he ends up coming back into her life when he has like skyrocketed himself to fame through his book and his reflections on technology and how technology is like kind of leading to the downfall of civilization in certain ways. He wants this return to like seeking of truth, he even says.
Yeah.
But there is this religious like drumbeat throughout the movie of how like there's the religious implications of what's going on and the religious pushback against the scientific like
I think it's because Carl Sagan was very aware of those, and then also it's probably another way to get those kind of people interested in the movie and the book,
Yeah. So there's this committee involved, and this guy Palmer Joss is on the committee, so she knows him and is kind of involved with him, and she kind of has this semi-romantic relationship with him still.
She S'd his D.
You don't know that.
Probably did. I just thought it was funny. It's like it was a little bit incestuous because it was like, be awful waste of space, and then it's Dad.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's probably some deep stuff going on.
Yeah, she's got some daddy issues.
So there's this committee involved. He's involved with picking the person, and he's clearly conflicted about whether or not he should pick her because he feels a little conflicted about his job and his role, and he ends up sort of tanking her opportunity by pointing out the fact that she's an atheist.
I couldn't tell if that was truly because he felt she didn't represent everybody, or if he was like, selfishly like, I don't want her to die.
I mean, I think he's a pretty honest guy when you come through. I mean, in terms of him being the religious kind of voice in there, I think he's pretty even keel and like a very like authentic character. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, he says in the end that he did it because she wanted her to stay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I fell asleep for a minute.
Anyway, so she loses the opportunity. Drumlin gets the opportunity to go. But while they're testing the machine, a religious zealot suicide bombs the machine and destroys it.
Basically, one of the dum-dums of our race. It's like, no, space bad. That's
somebody who's just
God good.
Super concerned about what the people are doing. And he's like obviously the fringe religious person, right?
Yeah.
He ends up killing Drumlin and destroying the machine that's been
the most satisfying part in the movie. Right. Fucking
really
taking out that piece of shit.
The whole machine is destroyed. Everybody's kind of reeling. They don't think they're going to rebuild the machine. And then she finds out from the mysterious tech guy that's been financing her all along that he has built a second secret machine because he bought the
Bronson?
Japanese.
I'm throwing that as the name. I think something like that.
Hanlon?
Okay.
Hanlon?
He's a Bronson-esque character.
Yeah.
Bronson.
Yeah.
Action Bronson.
No, yeah. No, who's the space guy? Isn't that Bronson?
I thought it was Dr. Bronson. My bad.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm throwing.
Who's
I was trying to make a guess the name. I can't remember.
Guy?
I don't
Who's
even know.
the ultra-rich white dude, long blonde hair? Isn't he Bronson?
The gentleman who had cancer, who was funding the thing from space to keep him alive, to do this whole process. Sorry, him.
But
I thought it was Bronson.
I think his name is Hanlon.
My bad.
Yeah, I think it is.
But this is a real person.
Yeah, that's what
Bronson. I don't know that.
It's probably not really Bronson. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
No.
He was the Virgin Mobile guy. Then he transitioned.
Oh, yeah.
What was his name?
That entrepreneur. I don't know who his name is.
I think it might be Bronson.
I know
I could be wrong. Anyway.
Okay. Continue.
So that guy Hanlon or whatever his name is.
Right.
Has built. He acquired the Japanese company that was building the secret second machine in Japan, and he basically picks her, and she was kind of the second runner-up anyway. So he picks her she's going to be the person that's actually going to use the machine.
Yeah. Well, he was watching it from the start, so I bet she was his first pick to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's really infatuated with her.
Yeah.
I mean, like even in the scene in the boardroom where she gets the funding, he's the one that chooses to.
He's like, it would be an awful waste of space. You
That's
feeling
the
anything
line.
there? That's like her trigger, like a sleeper agent. Like that's how you get her to sleep with you. It would be an awful waste of space.
So she gets to be the one that goes into the machine, and does anything happen before she gets to go? No, she kind of talks with Palmer Joss before she goes, and he tells her that the reason that he kind of he says he did think that she didn't represent humanity, but really he just wanted her to stay.
Yeah.
Because he brings up Einstein's special relativity and how she would be gone for, 50 years Earth time, but only 4 years her time if she was traveling.
It's interesting though. I think she would probably be the best candidate, and I think Carl Sagan wrote a lot of himself into her character.
Oh yeah,
and
I think
if I could choose anybody to ever be our representative, it would probably be Carl Sagan.
Sure. If you could bring him back.
Yeah, maybe they could. We sent instructions to rebuild Carl Sagan so he can meet with us.
We got his messages.
Yeah. We watched Contact. It was pretty dope. It gave us the idea. We're doing it.
So he kind of talks to her about how he wanted her to stay, and she is just so willing to leave, as she was kind of willing to leave everything behind anyway for the sake of the mission. She ends up going through the machine, and from her perspective, she travels through a series of wormholes toward the center of the galaxy, and when she encounters the life on the other end, it's in the vision of her dad on a beach that she drew as a kid. And they basically tell her that they've heard their message, and this is how it works, is they reach out to civilizations that talk to them and bring them into the fold of this galactic society, basically. But she doesn't know what they really look like. She doesn't know really anything about their civilization. They tell her that this is the first step in kind of bringing humanity in. And not every civilization that
Next
contacts
time you'll
them.
get the jacket.
What's that?
Next time you'll get the jacket.
Yes, right.
As part of the club. Yeah.
And they'll take your picture and you get the membership card.
Yeah.
But not every civilization that contacts them even gets brought there. Like not every civilization makes it that far. But that's the first step. And they send her back without any sort of proof or anything to like kind of prove that she was there. And in fact, when she gets back, she finds out that even though she feels like she's been gone for 18 hours, she has basically passed through instantaneously, and it seems like nothing has happened. And there's a big trial, or not trial, but there's a big hearing with the national security guy who seems like he has political ambitions.
He's so aggressive the whole fucking movie.
He is, he does. He does a pretty good job. Yeah. And he basically attacks her, saying that nothing really happened, and everything she's saying about her experience was false. And there's no evidence of what happened, and gets her to admit that basically without evidence, she can't say that anything for sure happened. And she basically admits that there's no proof, and that everything she says must be taken on faith.
Yeah, which brings it back to the whole religious aspect. Yeah.
So, and then in the end, afterward, you get this moment between her and Palmer Joss. And everybody's interested in what he thinks because
he's like, "You bitch, I told you."
He several times throughout the movie. He's like he kind of sees like oh, like she's kind of encountering things that I experience as a religious person.
Yeah. Well, there's that whole scene. Do you love your dad? Prove it.
Right. Yeah. Which is also a very interesting scene as well. In the end of the movie, though, people are interested in what he's thinking as he walks her to the car and asks what he thinks, and he says that her and him have the same search for truth within their field, and that he believes her. You know,
which is probably the most direct point of the entire movie, which is like we're all searching for questions. It's just some find it through science, some find it through religion, some kind of meld the two, which she kind of does towards the end. And
in her hearing, she says the only evidence she has is the experience. Like this experience of something greater than herself that she wishes she could share with everybody, but has no way of doing so.
Which, if you put those, you could take those words and put it into a religious person's mouth.
Totally,
totally valid. Yeah.
And then there's one scene at the end where she's maybe years later, where she's at the array, and she's not really this like really intense zealot anymore about science or anything. These kids are there, and they ask her if there's possibly life on other planet. She asks the kid what he thinks, and he says, "I don't know." And she says, "That's a very good answer." Yeah. And I think it kind of fades out from there.
Yeah. That's a pretty good wrap up of the. Yeah. That was pretty exactly how it went.
It was probably a bit too long, but
no, that was good.
That was kind of.
But it does bring up a lot of fucking questions.
It does.
The whole. Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe you guys can go over your just initial reactions to the movie.
Sure.
Well, we talked earlier. That fucking movie resonates with me so well because I always imagine myself like, even the visuals of her like in the little pod, like it's so fucking surreal and dreamy, and I think we're all asking, are we fucking alone? Like, you know, and it's probably pretty evident that we're not, you know.
Yeah.
Because like even the whole it's waste of space kind of is. It's fucking almost as close to infinite as we can imagine.
And she goes through the argument of how many stars there are, even in our galaxy, and if one in a million, you know, if 1 in a million of those had
planets, and just out of those, 1 million of those had intelligent life, there would be literally millions of civilizations out there.
Right.
Yeah. And so
the odds are, and that's
the whole
what
Drake. Where
the
Drake
fuck
equation.
Are they?
Yeah. The whole point. One of the guys said the drumlin. He was like, "There's either life out there, but it's so far away that we'll never reach it, or there's nothing." And it's like, I think that's probably true too, and that's why it drives me nuts when people are like, aliens, man, they've been here, they reconstructed our society, they encoded us with the alien DNA, so we went from chimps to. I'm like, yeah, probably not. It's the whole fucking Occam's razor. It's like the simplest answer is probably the right one, and that is probably we're never going to see them. I think that's the most likely thing. It's just that space is too big. And that's what makes me almost, this is going a little left turn, but it's almost what makes me think of why we would be in a simulation. Like a simulation would be mostly empty. It's like in certain games how it's like it only loads as you approach each spot.
Right.
So it's like I could imagine like those are like peripheral things that they put in place that we could see, but we'll never actually get there. So they don't actually have to load that.
There is no existence beyond our perception.
And then because everything else is so far out of reach, the closest thing we have is Mars, right? So I think if we were a simulation, we would put something that's kind of accessible to make us feel like we're doing something, but everything else is literally out of reach.
So yeah, I kind of want to talk about that in a couple ways. So first of all, I think there's a real idea that like nothing exists outside of perception, and basically before human perception, there was nothing in the sense that it was kind of just chaos.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until things were able to or not even human perception, any sort of perception at all. Once perception was there, then things actually existed in the way we understand things existing.
Well, it's weird to think that before any life, everything was still here. It's just there's nothing for that to bounce off and somebody
to experience
it.
There's no experience.
From my understanding, like the way that we see, like the distance is measured by either light or radiation at this point. So that's kind of our maximum reach. So there's like a microwave background, and that's kind of how we assume there's this range. But it's just like one framework. We don't really. I mean, that's what I'm kind of wondering too, is how that gets pushed. But the strangest thing to me about this movie is that it resonates way better. I think like one I'd point out would be like District 9 kind of pushed me the wrong direction just because it's so
You really like that movie.
It's good, but it's just
I thought it was interesting.
I'm sorry to pull out another one in relation, but I think it's a good example of like probably a good interpretation of how humans would respond to another species being involved, but it's like just kind of depressing, to be honest, just to watch that all play out that way.
9, you mean?
To me, it just I would have higher hopes for humanity, even though I probably don't deep down. I don't think that would go much differently, but like in this movie, what I think is interesting is it's kind of really resonates with like the Carl Sagan's mode of, at least during the time, a lot of people were worried about space funding. How do we get people to go and go and study this? And so a lot of people thought that good pictures, Hubble telescope at that time was put up there. And so all that was kind of in this big push to kind of get this interest in space. And then Sagan's idea is that like, you see the finiteness of the universe, you see how small we are in this rock, you see like the expanse, the chance of aliens, yada yada, and that gives you a change of mind where the consciousness shift that he kind of suggests that she has in the movie, right? Like specifically her goes through this radical consciousness shift, which what do you think? Do you think that's real? Do you think that, maybe did you see the big blue rock when you were younger, or were you just blown away? I mean, how much of space pictures have
Oh, I think it
giving you the gig.
Works.
I mean, what gets you going about that?
I think
does
if
it resonate with you?
I think if everybody could actually have that experience of seeing Earth from the outside,
different,
then it would really affect them in a real way. I think
sure.
seeing pictures. I think maybe now at this point we're a little desensitized because we really didn't know what the Earth looked like maybe in history when there wasn't that perspective.
We didn't even know about other galaxies till like 100 years ago.
Sure.
Like we thought this was it. A fucking 100 years ago, bro. That's all of this is brand new. And in terms of how it affects, like the image and stuff, it just made me think. I was thinking about this earlier when you were summarizing the movie. She's it shows her as a bright kid, and her dad like kind of pushes that, and he nurtures that. It's like it just shows that like if you start at a young age and give kids practical knowledge of how things really work, they take a natural interest, and you can. What would she have been like if her dad wasn't so
Well. So I've heard this Carl Sagan say, because he was personally really interested in the search for extraterrestrial life.
Yeah.
And he said one of two things would happen: either we would find like intelligent life elsewhere, and it would radically change everything. We would join a galactic community, and it would change history forever. That's one possibility. Or we would never contact anybody, and we would realize how unique, how special, and how fragile our existence is. And he said either way, it's a win-win.
That was like that was almost a brighter version of what the other
dude
said.
Drumlin said, right? Yeah. And I think for him, I think he was a very optimistic person, and I think his take on alien, I think kind of what he wanted to do with Contact was give a positive, optimistic view of alien life, because I think the popular mindset is like aliens as monsters, right?
Well,
and I think
if they're here for resources. Is the idea, right?
Yeah.
And I think it could make some sense.
No, it makes no fucking sense at all.
I
will die on that hill. It makes no fucking sense for them to come here for fucking resources. They have infinite resources if they can get here.
Okay, and I think
simple as that.
This is where like the scientist view diverges from the worldview of the common person, because common people experience the world as a very struggling existence, right?
Yeah.
And for most of our history, like outsiders always meant that like there was a clash, there was a war, right?
Yeah.
So
and
that's
we project that on.
I think that's a worldview people have, right? And this is that part of that interpretation thing where I think people think about aliens and they think about what that means, and they just project their own experience onto it. And I think someone like Carl Sagan is optimistic in the way that Ellie voices of like, if there's an intelligent species out there, like they made it through this chaotic time, right? And like they have to be more intelligent.
Well, they say like, how did you do it? How did you get so far and not blow yourself up?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I just know Hawking really pushed that narrative, right?
That guy was an idiot. I'm kidding.
I know. Yeah,
how
dare I even suggest?
Yeah.
No, I think that like his idea is that they would be militant in some pretty radical way, and I think that there's like there's a real good logic train to it, because if it's all about incentive for the species. So if they're going to veer off track or even come, they just have no incentive to be here. And then the minute that they would be...
That's so not true. What incentive do we have to study sea creatures?
There's a lot of there's like a Darwinian argument, right, where he just kind of says a lot of species. I mean, we're basically on this kind of pyramid of animals that are just constantly vying and revying, and that's how kind of this whole Darwinian evolution moves forward. But because of that, like, I mean, the same would apply like with all forms of life and how they sort of scrutiny evolve. I mean, they could decide as a society to like transcend those principles, but then that argument's that most of the time, like if a society probably came to full completion, then they would probably decide to never leave, like whatever that means. But like, but the idea would be that like they wouldn't leave their planet, right? They'd want to take the most care of it possible, and like if that's truly about that place in the universe and understanding it fully, that's actually where it would go. They would just stay, probably be hyper religious and try to be as like
if they had a complete
if they were
because like
the idea is if they like take this cosmology, like there's sort of like cosmic approach to everything, where it's just like the universe is the greatest, like the galaxies, the one like a true line of it all. Then I think that they wouldn't want to affect it at all. They wouldn't want to. If they treat it like the perfect sort of orchestra that it is, then I think they just would try to be a part of it. Be as harmonious
it's about
with
curiosity
the whole thing.
and adventure. That's what it is.
One or the other make more sense.
To that point, though, like why are humans trying to leave Earth now?
Resources.
Well, we say
right.
Yeah. Well, I'm not done.
Because
I'm saying
we fucked up this world, right?
And I think that's secondary. I think primarily
have
it's
you heard
curiosity
about the golden
and
platinum
adventure.
asteroid they're looking at? Like it's
I think
$5 quadrillion in today's dollars.
For the people actually doing it, I would say it's probably like Elon. We need a second backup plan. But if you were to ask anybody why would you want to go to space, they would not say because we need a backup. They would say because it's amazing and the most amazing adventure anybody could ever possibly go on. And I think that's primary.
I mean, I think I'm very sympathetic to the optimistic point of view, and I think it's just as feasible, obviously, that any advanced civilization would be enlightened in some way. But I do find more interesting and more real, and that's because of my human experience, the stories like District 9 and the stories like you've ever seen any of the Expanse series? This that any sort of expansion kind of leads to more of the same stuff that we have going on of this kind of oppression and most of the people struggle,
But what kind of people are we sending into space? They're usually very rational, like astronauts. I doubt there's a lot of warmongering astronauts out there,
So are you saying that the people that contact us from an alien civilization would necessarily be the most intelligent and best of their species? Or do you think the whole species would be like a benevolent, good species?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I just think it's the whole question they talked about. Why would we go to if we were studying microbes, why would we just want to squash them out for no reason? And then the guy was like, well, would you have any feelings about squashing out some microbes?
How would you feel if
there's that question. But I think any alien species like us would find that life in any other place in the universe is so rare and special that they would want to preserve it. And I think also any war-hungry, overly aggressive civilization, they're probably more likely to blink themselves out of existence. So by the time you get to the point where you can evolve enough to go discover, you're probably a bit more civilized to begin with. And also, if you can find out how to travel across the great distance of space, you're probably hyper-intelligent. Like, the whole AI thing is like exponentially growing intelligence. Like that's why they always say whoever creates the first real AI is going to have a leg up on everybody, because it's just going to grow and grow and grow and grow in intelligence. And it's like, what comes of that intelligence? Is it just dominate everything, or is there like a serenity that comes with
Does it turn
ultimate
the whole
knowledge?
world into paper clips?
My two favorite parts about the movie by far, before we get too way off, is like the actual machine itself, really cool. I mean, it obviously has like a lot of lure to it. And then I think I actually really enjoyed the bridge itself. I thought the animation was great, especially if he was saying it was made in 1997. I mean, that's well done.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I think that actually kind of stays. Like, it doesn't age that poor. I actually thought it would be, because I didn't know when exactly it was made. I would say like early 2000s for sure, but it didn't really have that feel other than like some of like the more communicative scenes. But the animation for that was actually really crisp.
Yeah.
I thought that was super good.
Well, I was thinking it'd be really interesting if you could find a way to bridge contact with Interstellar, because Matthew McConaughey's in both. So if you could find a way, like Interstellar is just part 2. They just decided to contact Matthew this time. all right. But it is a bummer that I feel like if we could find a way to create a wormhole, or I think it's called like an Einstein-Rosen bridge or whatever, I bet it would rip us to shreds if we actually tried to go through one.
Yeah, we don't know anything that would happen, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like going into a black hole.
Yeah. But it's like the most beautiful thought ever.
Stargate's written off it. There's all the conspiracy papers and stuff. People have been talking about it for a while. I think it's an interesting idea. There's like a variety of series that are off the idea of a Stargate existing on the planet. I think it's wild.
Like
Absolutely.
a real one, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like a naturally
controlled by
one?
government, hidden behind closed doors, that kind of a thing.
No way.
But I mean,
No. To me, it's like a 0%
people think crazier things than that. Let's be fair. So I think that's sort of just like
I think that's underestimating.
Always is a thought-provoking exercise. Sure. If anything, I think those kinds of ideas are sort of like designed as sort of hedge, like they're hegemony. Like I think they're sort of a deterrent in some sense. Like.
Turns out there is one, and one guy just uses it to
like if you just keep throwing like if you just keep throwing like 100 things at the wall that we're doing wild behind the scenes with money nobody can watch and just pretend like it's all there, like it's not like, well, for one, it's like huge dissuasion, right? It's like really strategic to some degree, where you just have like
people think that
tons of narratives out. Well, it's impossible to like interpret it all. Plus, it probably wastes time of other countries, etc. Like it's all pretty strategic, I think, to some degree. I know it sounds dumb, but
I mean, honestly, I'm always skeptical of humans really being able to conspire or keep anything secret. That's really truly meaningful, especially if it can be exploited in some other way.
Military pulls it off occasionally though, but I don't know. That's a tough one, because like what about spy planes out of like Russian war? I would say would be like the best example from the Cold War. I mean, we really didn't know for 20-25 years that it even existed, and it won us the war. I mean, I think that's probably the cleanest example is Black Hawk. But there's a couple other ones like that where it just totally makes sense that we would keep the tool on the tool shelf and wouldn't tell you about it.
Yeah,
it's so much better.
I do think it is really fucking hard to keep a conspiracy like a genuine one together, but also I do think that if we did come across some kind of alien thing, they would definitely keep it under wraps.
for anything, like I just think for like military defense, it would actually be one of the few things it would be justified for. But
it does. I feel like pose a lot of threat. I feel like.
I hope if there is aliens, it's straight up 1-for-1, exactly like Paul. Fucking Seth Rogen. You fucking idiot.
I hope they keep us honest. Yikes. Someone needs to. Shit.
But yeah, going back to Ellie's perspective though. So Carl Sagan had a very optimistic view of aliens, and like and Ellie does too. But I think I would say, his one of two possibilities. I think he was really willing and able to accept both of those possibilities, and I think he really was a humanitarian in a way that he really did believe that, like.
Talking Palmer?
I'm talking about
Carl Sagan. Okay.
Like, he did see the world as a very precious thing, and he, in his scientific thinking, he saw us all connected in a way that no culture really does.
And it's weird because that is like a form of spirituality, and it's probably the most genuine, but we fucking overshadow it with all this fucking eating body of some dead Jewish guy. Like, Jesus Christ.
I think for
literally Jesus Christ. That was so unintentional.
But I do think while Carl Sagan is like that kind of epitome of altruistic scientific mind, I think Ellie, the character of Ellie, is more of a hyper rational scientific minded person. And I think her search
autistic spectrum.
I think her search for extraterrestrial, I don't think she would have been okay if we never found anybody. I feel like there was something deeply psychological for her.
She would have always been.
I think there was a very religious belief for her.
Oh, yeah.
Like she needed a higher power. Yeah. I think that's why she believed.
Well, the mom was passed away at the start, right? Yeah, right? And then one of the questions she asked when she's laying there is, "Can we talk to mom?"
Yeah. Right.
And so it was
and when her dad dies,
cute immediately, and then obviously they bring that forward. It seems like, well, I mean, the conversation from the being that she meets there is that we thought this would be the easiest way to interact with you, right? Just use overlaying like 4 deep memories. And I think
also your dad's still dead.
By the way, I'm not him. But we love you, sort of. I don't know. It's a weird attitude, but I liked it though.
It was interesting. They said Palmer or whatever. He was like, "Do you think we created God so we wouldn't feel so small and alone?" You know, and that's probably the reason she was so dead set on finding something too, because she felt small and alone.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I think feeling and even the alien in the end to her says that the only way we've been able to like feel less alone in this world is by finding other civilizations, right?
Which is exactly why we want to find other civilizations. So it's like I think he was projecting what an alien race would be like, because that's why we want to find aliens. It's like, are we fucking alone?
Right. And I think again, like his version of alien is like the hyper scientific, like altruistic sort of minded kind of person. But I think it was different for Ellie. I think for her, I mean, at least the way I interpreted it, it just seemed for her that it was more of like this kind of religious, spiritual thing that she felt a lack in the world and wasn't able to accept being alone, and like needed to find, and in her own scientific way of thinking, right? She needed to reach out.
It blew my mind that she was so kosher with meeting Drumlin when he was about to go off. I would have ripped his eyeballs out. Like, you piece of shit. I started this. You called me a moron. Then when I find some real shit, you fucking hijack the shit. I would have stabbed him in his sleep. Then I would have resurrected him and stabbed him again. Like, that is the most bullshit thing anybody could do. But it also happened quite a bit and during that time with women in scientific fields and all that stuff. So that was probably a very intentional thing.
I think part of it was her personality of like, she was so rational that she saw no reason to engage emotionally with the world.
Unrealistic to me. Right? I would have ripped his eyeballs out.
But she was cold.
I would have ripped his balls out, the whole time, shoved him down his throat. Mm-hmm. You're talking about meeting an alien race. The most magical, incredible thing that any human could ever do. Mm-hmm. And someone just takes that from you, chop his balls off. Straight up.
Well, they layer faith terminology to the whole movie to give it that kind of vibe. It's good that way, I think.
I mean, honestly, that was one of the things that resonated for me most when I watched Contact the first time. Actually, the first thing when I watched Contact, and I said this to my partner when I watched it with Clementine, is that I experienced that as a very anticlimactic movie, and I think it was I had to like reflect on it before I realized kind of the grand nature of it, right? Because I think for me, I was like expecting to see aliens, and I was expecting to like kind of know more about the other civilization, to like know more of the unknown. But I think it is a very human movie because it everything's kind of reflected back on the main characters, right? So it took me time to like realize that like the climax is this, you know, it's a historical moment, right? Yeah. The historical moment of the first contact with an extraterrestrial species, right?
I think one of the...
I just imagine the Family Guy when he's talking about like movies who say the name of the movie. He's like, oh, he said it.
I think
it looks like we just made into the camera Contact. But sorry, go ahead.
You're good. I think there's like a pressure, or at least there's sort of this quip used in like religious dogma where they kind of just suggest that, you know, you're human, like you can't understand the framework, like no matter how it goes. And so I think that sci-fi can kind of spoof on that nature and sort of actually sort of sit alongside the religion in the way that it kind of functions, because I don't know, I've kind of been spun that a couple times, you know, when I've asked questions when I was younger, being raised like a Protestant kid or whatever around the Catholic thing. And it sort of looks at it like, you know, that the all-knowing, omniscient sort of person would not sort of engage with us in that sort of modality. So it makes sense that...
Why are you asking questions, kid?
No, exactly that.
Basically,
like, you go to the bridge, it comes back, he's like, you wouldn't understand anyways, sort of thing. And you're all just like, okay. And that's sort of the whole tone.
It's incredible how much they gaslight you when you're a kid, into thinking you're crazy, like asking rational questions. Be like, wait, so he died, came back to life. How does that work? Also, he's dead now, but he's not dead. He went there, and we eat him every Sunday. Why is that? And they're like, just, you know, it's for God. And it's like, no, that's stupid. That's stupid.
Right, but yeah, and in religion they have in Catholic religion, that's just all I know, is they have the whole mysteries, right? There's the mysteries.
Willing ignorance.
Yeah,
that's what I would call it.
Well, yeah, but I think science experiences something similar with when it encounters the unknown. There are mysteries in science as well. I think the idea of science is that we know more and more over time.
But also, there's an assumption that you can't know it all. That's all it really is.
Yeah, but the difference between the two is that science doesn't fill the holes with made up shit to try to make sense of it. We say currently we just don't understand that spot. You know? Right.
Yes. Yeah. And I think these days the religious terminology and trying to justify everything is pretty I don't know. It's pretty futile. And obviously it's not even the same project anymore, right? Yeah. But I think the character Palmer Joss is a more enlightened religious figure in that he understands not the institution, right? He's not a man of the cloth in the literal sense that he belongs to the church, but he's a man of the cloth in that he's a very spiritual person. But and for him, it's this whole search for truth type thing. I think what Carl Sagan and what the movie tries to say is that at the root of religion, right, is the same drive. I
think the key difference between religion and science is religion starts at the point of we have all the answers. It's in this book. It was ordained by God.
I don't know if it does because
I think it defines the territory.
What do we know about God?
Yeah, but right. I don't know. I just really hate religion.
There's this trust. There's trust. There's trust in God. There's trust in. There's faith.
Yeah.
That either things will be okay or that.
But it just feels like there's only so far religion can go, and I think that that stopped about fucking 1,000 years ago or something.
No, science says it's utility. I mean, it works in people's lives.
It has its utility, and it had its utility, but we've outgrown it.
Well, I don't know. I think you're speaking for yourself and not for people who still experience.
Well, everybody who doesn't agree with me is wrong.
Well, I mean, go to Alcohol Anonymous. I think that'd be a good example. I mean,
totally.
It totally functions.
It does.
It's difficult.
It is functional as a tool. But I think we've outgrown it and it's unnecessary. Not to say spirituality isn't necessary. I'm all for that. But the lunacy that comes with all forms of religion, stoning people, jerking off is bad, cut off part of your dick. Ridiculous. If religion didn't exist and you brought forth these ideas, we had this conversation cut off your dick. You're going to eat this paper, but it's actually a dude. You're going to drink this wine, it's actually his blood. You'd be like, are you on fucking crack right now, you crazy person?
Most of them are health protocols for society.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. You can take the good, if you want to get nitty-gritty, all the crazy shit, and take what's left.
Well, I mean, the reality at the time, all those were health codes.
I'm not saying it didn't really serve its function. I think we are here today because of religion in many aspects, but I think we don't need it anymore. We just don't need it. Not to say we don't need spirituality.
Right. And
I think the moral structure that it provides.
I think that's the danger, though, in being so anti-religious, is that you risk losing the same nugget at the core of it that is at the core of true science. Because I also believe that there is a dogmatic science that is unproductive in the way that there's a dogmatic religious experience or whatever that is also unhelpful. But I think that's just the human conflict aspect, or the human almost like the shutting off of your mind of just trudging through life and doing things the way you're told. There's even a way of seeing science that way, I think, and that science has all the answers and there's no need for wonder, no need for personal experience. And I think the truly human thing is that like she says in the end of the movie, is that and Palmer Joss says when he was younger, he had a religious experience that he can't describe to her. And then later she says the same thing about her experience with extraterrestrials. Yeah. And I think it's that experience of God and that experience of true understanding in science that I think is what you don't want to lose. And I think attacking religion and it's you could attack science for all the missteps that it made, right? Yeah. And you could attack science.
But those are missteps on the individual.
Not necessarily. They were whole, the way medicine was done for a while and the way that, Galileo was persecuted for so long.
But that's not where the science leads. That's just where people see the science, they take it and say, we can do this with it, which is, I guess that's what religion does too. But I think...
But that's Drumlin is the, what can we do with science?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think, and Ellie is
that's a good point.
The pure scientific person. Yeah. And I think for Carl Sagan, it was, I think he was deeply a humanist person in that he believed that science was a way to understand ourselves in some way. And and I don't know. I don't really know the connection, and maybe it's worth talking about why there is such a connection between the search for extraterrestrial life and the search for God in this truth story.
Well, I'm suggesting that it was a PR media choice from the Cold War. And I really think that that's true. Like, I think that a lot of media sort of represents from that time us trying to be like, by the way, be interested in space. Put your kids in these types of, let's get to... There's a push. I mean, yikes. Let's be real. It happened. I think that there was.
He's talking about the religious aspect.
There's a space race.
It's just in space.
Well, I mean, there's a space race between Russia and the United States, getting satellites up there, and so there's tons of different things that go into that. Of course, at that time, so they're trying to. I mean, a lot of literature on it, where they're basically saying that pictures are huge, incentivizing. I mean, there's tons of people from that generation that saw the moon land and were wanting to be astronauts. Like, it's not a fucking joke. So, I think that applies to us now. Better imagery and everything. I think that does incentivize people, but I don't think it's as strong as it was right away. Like, it had its kind of fad moment in time, but I think it means
I think
something.
It's still out there with SpaceX and seeing the rockets land.
I think that's a revival of it, a very specific revival. But I do feel like
died out a bit.
What we thought was going to happen with the space exploration did not pan out the way it was expected. But there is an argument that all technological advances have been made in the name of military power and things like that. What I think is true to some extent, but then I think we apply it to more productive ends when it comes.
But I do think it's so. We're so every generation probably says we live in the best time to be alive, which is probably true because every generation gets
to the dark ages.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's.
Except
but
pre-recession.
It's
pre-2009. Like, what do you mean? Careful. I don't know.
Except for last week.
Yeah, Jesus.
But I do talk to people about this all the time. How fucking beautiful is it that like universe is like 15 billion years old. Planet's like it's like 4, right? 4.5.
4.
Yeah. And life is like almost right after that starts. All those billion years of evolution, the evolution of man, and we just happen to be alive for the first time in all of history, where not only can we see the planet from an outside perspective, but we also have the opportunity to go to another planet, which again to me is the most awe-inspiring and beautiful experience any human being could ever have. I think it's the most amazing thing.
I just think it's going to be Alien vs. Predator at some level. Like,
what does that even mean?
Like, I mean, if it's contact, like, I just feel like the only reason they would be here would just be
to study. It'd be out of intrigue.
Yikes.
So I think here's an interpretive question, right? Like, what makes you think? What do you feel? Okay, like turn it back on yourself and reflect.
Every single species in our near vicinity has like huge portions of this.
Think of how much more savage we were just 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Ridiculously savage. And I feel like we're getting a bit more civilized as we go on. So imagine 1,000 years from now if we don't happen to blow ourselves up. I think the more advanced and do you disagree?
We're getting better.
Just like 150 years. We had a president that went through a duel and fucking got shot, like died. That was like so recent. Like it used to be so much more savage. Like you are so much safer today.
Relatively speaking.
Yeah, in terms of we have the ability to fucking nuke an entire.
I'll ask like a simple question. Do you see violence around you in society?
Yeah, but probably exponentially less.
Do you see violence celebrated in society?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, UFC.
Okay. Here's my question. Okay, if you had to stay, so clearly you have an interpretive difference in how you view, not necessarily even the movie, but just like
the
space race and our ambition as a human race and things like that. If you could boil that down to like a philosophical maxim about what it is to be human or alive, like could you put that, or do you think you could put that into words in any way of like, like why are you so hopeless, or why are you so hopeful?
To use like conventional like literature, I think it's a little bit of like, it's such a buzzword, but like a little bit of Eastern philosophy is kind of a little safe here, where you get a little bit of like this understanding that people are sort of this good-bad duality, and you're trying to find happy mediums, and that I think that there's a couple other things I would take. One is that society does dictate the type of person to a certain degree, their demeanor, their incentives, their everything. So, I mean, people that grow up in the United States are radically different than other countries around the world. So that's actually where I find the biggest problems when I'm studying other cultures today contemporarily. I'm just wondering, okay, let's say we do this big cultural blend. Like, how does that really look, I think? And I think that Some people are going to win out, some people won't, depending on what kind of society they function in.
Keep the brown people out? Is that where you get?
No.
That's what I'm. Nah, I'm just.
No, you're the one talking about naming this MAGA house. It's not on me.
MAGA. Okay.
Zing. No, but really though, I think
white cisgendered fuck.
Amen. That's me, dude. No, it's just I think it's a lot more complicated, and I don't think
the murderers. Sorry.
I'll put it this way: I don't think that there's like one conceptual idea that's going to transcend all of humanity simultaneously. I don't think that's how it functions. I don't think that's what we're in. I think it's going to be a combination of things, and then even then, there's so much diversity of thought, like at the end point. So it's all about the structures, right? It's all about the decision-making structures that sort of dictate how the ship's steered, and so we've got to be ruthlessly critical of those. We've got to be exactly. We've got to create the Noah's Ark for space. No, but I think it really comes down to the decision-making structure really dictates how progress is led. I think it's almost everything. Like I'm very policy forward, so
it's very pragmatic.
I see Occupy, all the Occupy movement happened years ago, and I'm like, all right, what's the policy? Like, what are we passing? What's it look like? Give me something. Like I'll do like what state, where, what city, what are we doing? And
okay,
you gotta have agenda. You gotta have agenda. It doesn't make any sense.
If you're saying it would be Alien vs Predator, if we were to find evidence of another intelligent life out there, do you think we would immediately try to go there and dominate them and fucking ravage them? I really highly doubt that.
Depends on what they've had. Depends on if we could. To be fair, but my argument, I think.
Assuming we could.
It's like the dumb Elon Musk quote where he says something to the effect of like I would probably know if there's aliens, which he might. I think that might be fair. But then the second thing he follows it up with is you know what would increase defense spending more than anything is rolling out the little kid and the green man would be the best thing to do, and I think that he's probably right. But as far as them being here right now,
we would be that brutish to just fucking find an intelligent life and immediately want to squash it out. I think it's the opposite of that.
Okay, well, what would you say if you had to boil down your interpretation of like the ambition or space or extraterrestrial encounter to like a sort of philosophical like evaluation of life?
I think it's the greatest adventure humanity could ever go on, to the search for other life out there. And I think we would space travel and all that. It costs so much money. And I think that every action we take on that is so intentional. And I think if we were to reach out, we would put our best foot forward. And I don't think there's any value to be had of just finding life. It's so fucking, it's like a needle in a needle stack. Like, well, that's a bad thing, because then everything would be out there. But it's like a needle in the largest haystack you could ever imagine. Yeah. You're not going to just go, oh, I found it, fucking toss it. Like, that just makes no sense.
Right.
And if we're at the point where we can reach them, we need nothing from them. Well, so it'd really be just on an observation basis. And
well, do you feel like then that life is just about getting to the next, getting better and better, getting to the next best thing, or like, you know what I'm saying? Like, do you feel like humanity's progress is always about
finding
being
answers?
Better, getting better?
I think yes, but I think it's about finding answers. I think we're all desperate to know whether or not we're alone, and I think if we found out we were not alone, we wouldn't immediately shoot that other person.
More important than anything else.
Yeah, well, literally than anything else. Yeah. Like that's.
I got a weird question.
Our happenstance is so one.
If you want to carry on the chain of thought, continue. But I got a good one. I think that's topical. What do you guys think about the idea of like, okay, let's say we wave the magic wand, we're colonized a few planets in the solar system. Mm-hmm. I've heard an argument. There's a couple different philosophers that they're not true philosophers, but they basically argue that like there'd be a devaluation of the way that we view home, Earth, like the mother, right? The mother. And I think that there's the argument sort of goes like this, where like if we can't completely take care of the biosphere almost entirely and like really take care of the environment, have all of these things really hammered out, that when we go to another planet, we're probably going to replicate something like that again, most likely, would be the idea, or at least the posit. And I think that that's probably true to some degree. Like, and so a lot of people think that it's like inevitable, that at the end of the day, especially when we make that jump where we've got a new place, we realize we can just keep doing this, it starts to kind of devalue the original home a bit. And I just think it's an interesting thing to think. What do you think about that?
I think Earth will always be special to us because it's the origin point. And I don't necessarily think that we'll repeat all of the same mistakes on another planet. I think we've only had a strong impact on the planet in the last 150, 200 years. Like but that's what trial and error is. We came across this great thing, which is like the Industrial Revolution. we don't even realize, we have no awareness that we're fucking up the planet until years later. And then now we're like, shit, we need to course correct. So we're doing things like renewable energies and all that stuff. So I think if we're going to the next place, we have all those mistakes to learn from. It's never going to be perfect. We're imperfect. But no, I think we're going to have a better run at the next.
Do you feel like as a species we're course correcting?
Yeah, I definitely do. I definitely
Hopefully,
do.
always, holy.
I definitely do.
Again,
I think we're
it's
getting,
one of these, right?
And people are so hard on like, we're destroying the planet. It's like, yeah, but we only just realized that. Like, it's not like we were trying to fuck up the planet. We were trying to make life better.
Yeah, and I think there's always going to be that inertia, right?
True.
Of like, you try and turn around everybody's worldview, and it's like the people are going to get it slowly, and it's going to take. And I think that what we're feeling now is the crunch of like, can we stop it in time?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think my response to your question is, if we did go to another planet, colonize a few other planets, something like that, I do think we would think Earth is special in this like mythic folklore sort of way,
regal beauty to it. Like,
yeah, but I think for me there's just poetry and like in just the mundane aspect of it. I think it'd be more like, let's say we go to Mars and there's a new civilization on Mars, and let's say even the bulk of humans live on Mars, and Earth is just like the planet we kind of used up, or people who couldn't leave, or whatever it was.
A little Wall-E action to it. You
Sure.
know?
Yeah.
You with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there would be this mythic story about Earth, but we would come and the reality would kind of smack us in the face and be like, wow, this is a pretty
well, if we were forced to abandon
rough
it,
place.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think,
But like,
I don't know. I do think that we would bring all our bad habits with us in the way that all our bad habits are what make us human.
Right.
And we would,
a lot of different flavors of that, turns out. There's a few different ways to make mistakes,
sure,
it turns out.
I think a lot of them are intrinsic to who we are, and I think we can do it better and better, right? And it's this constant, like, I don't know. It might even be worse because we have no natural rhythm with any other planet, right?
Yeah.
It would be a completely artificial world to some degree. And
Sure.
unless we nuke it, right?
Would you want to go to space in your lifetime? Is that a thing that interests you for sure?
Would. Yeah,
I
totally.
think that's that's a lot of people.
Yeah,
right?
I
just
think
want to make sure.
Let's save
Gut
that
check.
250 Gs.
I'm definitely the kind of person who, like, if given the chance, I might answer differently now that I have a family, but like, given the chance, I would eject myself into space, experience it for 20 minutes, and then die.
Of course.
That kind of thing.
Wait, you would die for just the 20 minutes of experience?
If that's what it took to experience space, I think I would do it.
I couldn't do that.
I'm with you.
There was the whole...
The spacewalk's worth it.
When all the dummies of science were like, yeah, we're going to go to Mars. They'll only be able to stay there for like a month, and then they'll die. But at least they got to do it.
And there's so many worse ways to go. I 100% agree. Yeah. It's not even funny.
Because honestly, I don't think I'll get to do it. But like, I would totally jump on the bus.
Well, you can definitely go to space. It's only going to get cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah, and, but I live a very meager existence on Earth.
Yeah.
Like it's not. There's a lot of things. I don't know if I'll get to go to Europe in my lifetime. You know, I hope so, but like I don't know if it's gonna happen.
I would rather go to space. If it was the option of going to space or never going to space and never leaving Spokane again.
That's too interesting. I gotta ask, like top 3 countries in Europe, like in order.
Where I would go?
Yeah, top 3.
I have a particular interest in Germany just because I
hates the Jews.
Studied a little bit. I studied a little bit of German. Plus, they have some amazing thinkers.
My last name's way too German to not respect that.
They have a pretty good history in terms of thinkers and stuff there.
Right.
Let's see. In Europe, specifically, I don't really know. I guess maybe like Spain or Portugal. That's like on the southern. Was Greece in Europe? I'd go to Greece.
Greece too.
Yeah, definitely for historical reasons as well. And then maybe Spain or Portugal just to experience the beaches or something.
Sure. Just curious what the flavor is. Some people have like a hyper-specific plan. It's always interesting to hear top-down.
There was 2 questions on there that I thought were pretty interesting. One less important one was still kind of important. Does scientific advancement make us happier or more cut off? That's one of the things McConaughey asks. And then the other one that I really like is if you were the person chosen to be the representative of all humanity.
Contact here.
Yeah. What is the question? Because they said, what question would you ask if you only had one? And I thought that was a pretty good.
I want to come back to the first question, but I want to just a second one because I kind of been thinking about it a little bit already. So there's something interesting that happens in the movie, and I don't know if you notice it, and it has to do with Ellie, and I think with her psychology and her drive to find extraterrestrial life. Like, I think in her mind she believes it's this scientific endeavor, but I think there's something deeply personal and emotional that all the emotion she denies in her life, I think, comes out in this search for extraterrestrial life. And that's why it's her like religious experience. And she gets asked that question. What would your question be if you got one question?
Yeah.
Right. And she says, how did you make it through this technological adolescence?
Yeah.
But then she goes.
This is the part you said I might not have caught.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
No, but
it's true. I see you're going with this.
She goes to meet the aliens.
Yeah.
Gets a very brief time with them.
And doesn't ask
asks a few questions.
Yeah.
And when she realizes she's about to leave, she asks maybe two more questions. That's not one of them.
Yeah.
In her instinctual reaction to the experience she has, her question is, will we get to come back?
Yeah.
And how are you going to send me with nothing? People need to see this.
Yeah.
Like, that's the question she asks.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's very telling, because I think she has a picture of what this all means to her.
Yeah.
And she has this like deeply like she wants to be representative of humanity and be this advocate of like pure scientific, emotionless like exploration. And I think for her it's a deeply like she feels so disconnected from the world.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with her history and things like that.
And I think you could easily tell that she would be so willing to never go back.
Oh yeah, and she says so. She said
yeah.
When Palmer Joss, Matthew McConaughey character says that like he's worried that the whole relativity thing, and he's like, you would be gone.
She's like, dude, we
4
fucked
years.
once. Get over it.
Yeah, and she was like, I might not even come back. He's like, you might be gone for 50 years. And she's like, I might not even come back.
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine with that. Like, it's worth one human life to make this stuff.
Yeah,
But I think
agree.
for her, it's very important that it is
Fucking
her
goosebumps.
life, that she is the one that is that person. And I think it's very telling.
In the retelling, did we go really specific though on the static cot, and it ended up being 18 hours of tape? I almost want to say that again because I remember that was cute. That was huge. Is that
That's a good point.
when they're sitting there at the end, it's just like they have that weird scene where it's actually paced pretty well. The conversation, she like frames it somehow like she's asking the person that inquired her during the hearing about whether or not any of it was fail, or whether she's under a psychotic delusion or whatever. And the idea is that she basically says, I understood we got static, but why is it 18 hours of static during that time? So it does really key in the,
cool part.
that actually is probably the most redeeming portion of it towards the end.
It is, yeah.
It's interesting. I'm not sure what to think about it. I did like that part a lot.
No, I think yeah, like, you in the end you kind of come to this place and it kind of marries this kind of faith on both ends of the spectrum of religious and scientific. The search for truth, the faith whole thing, and how she's put in the position that religion is often put into in the end, and how she can only really talk about her experience. And then that moment,
that was so intentional.
Yeah, oh, totally, yeah. And I think it's a very, very powerful moment. But I do think it's very validating that you find out that there is this 18 hours of static, and it's very interesting. When the first time I watched it, I thought about the national security guy who has political ambitions. He's so determined to squash this like idea that she actually went anywhere, right? He's got this whole push on how she's delusional. There's no evidence, and it's all a conspiracy by the rich tech guy as like one big hoax before he dies or whatever.
That was a cool little thing to throw in.
Yeah,
I didn't even think about
decent plot.
That,
and it's actually very convincing. And I think for a moment you're kind of like, she is kind of an emotionally unstable person, right?
Yeah.
And like she almost has this like, I mean, honestly, the first time I watched it, I was like, did she just go to heaven? Because she goes and she sees her dad.
But I think that was so intentional, that feeling of it's so similar to what we view as heaven.
Am I seeing a plot hole? Like, why don't they just run it again?
That's a fucking good. I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Well,
I was thinking they could.
I'm sorry. I was having that towards the end where I'm like, I think press go. I mean, what are we doing?
I think they're convinced that, first of all, that there was a malfunction, right? That's the first thing to say, is that we're trying to figure out the source of the malfunction. They're pretty sure it didn't work. Like, I think it's such a fraught topic altogether.
But also,
and I think that guy is very intentionally trying to squash the idea that anything did happen at all, and that it was a big hoax. I think because of his own national security concerns.
He's just bitter because he got abducted once and they fucked him. He's like, we're not going back. We're not going back.
Well, I think that's maybe this is, he keeps it becomes the Stargate. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing is going on.
But I think that's a good point. I think as humans, even if it did not work, we'd be like, okay, we just got to try it again. Just keep doing it.
But I think politically, that's what I'm saying, is I think politically, I think his motives in the end, and the fact that you see that there actually is evidence, and the fact that he knows it, but also tries to suppress the fact that there is evidence, shows that he's very intentionally trying to discredit her and keep the project off of like any sort of path. Yeah.
I just think if this was a real world scenario, I think we would kind of push that guy to the side. And I think for that project costed billions of dollars. It's like, CERN didn't work out the first run, so just like, okay, scrap it. Like, no, we'd be like, okay, let's adjust some things, keep trying. I think realistically,
I think you're very hopeful that the most intelligent and even-minded people are in charge.
And I don't know. Do you honestly think we would take a multi-billion-dollar thing and just like, oh, it didn't work the first round, I guess we're done? I don't think that's how we do it.
I mean, yeah, if we ever built it in the first place, I think there would have to have been a lot of discussion beforehand, right?
I'm just imagining us doing it again and it working, and you see the alien like talking, he's like, oh fuck, what are you doing? You're back, okay.
We also don't know that
they would let it happen,
right? Yeah, because he does say it's just the first step, and in time you'll take the next step. And actually, when you were talking earlier about,
I just wasn't sure if I missed something in the plot that made it a one and done.
I didn't feel that. They never explain that, but they never rule out the fact that it has a single charge, or that I kind of assumed that it was kind of suppressed politically. That was kind of how I came out of it, just based on the guy's actions at the end and finding out that he had evidence that suppressed the evidence.
I'm just thinking of humans coming back, and the alien is like, all right, you can be part of the club. Drink this jar of mayonnaise. Like, just fucking hazing us.
Well, it made me think when earlier when you were talking about just civilizations being advanced and whatnot, that they never tell humans that, they never tell her that when they're going to come back or what they have to do to come back.
Oh my God, that just made me think of something. Sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want to lose this thought. It's so similar to people waiting for the second coming of Jesus.
Sure.
That's like, God, I wonder if that was intentional. Like, we had the first taste, and now we're just forever waiting, right. And they left that super open-ended.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought too the second time watching it that I wonder how much of a kind of following she gets, or this kind of the idea of like, we've made contact. People who believed her, basically. I wonder what kind of following kind of happened after that, and maybe it becomes kind of a second coming thing.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if maybe the whole idea of not allowing humans to join outright is kind of, well, he does say there's no tests, right? The alien says there's no tests.
Does he say that?
Involved. Yeah, he says there's no tests going on.
Right. She asked.
But I wonder if there is a sort of like, what's the Star Trek thing? The first
Prime Directive.
Prime Directive.
Yeah.
There is humans have to work their shit out enough, like before you're even able to.
Well, I think the Prime Directive
if you end up destroying yourself, then we're not going to stop.
I think the Prime Directive is we leave them alone and don't ever contact them, and then if they happen to come across us, that's when they. Because I think they're like never interact with any founder.
Well,
I think it's both. I think you're both around. I don't know.
Yeah. It was making me think like maybe these aliens, their job isn't to like make sure our society goes well, right?
Yeah.
Their job is to like be there if you are ready to join when you're ready to join, and like kind of let you work things out, because obviously he even mentions how like humans are very volatile, right?
I wish there was a way you could connect this with Interstellar and also Seth Rogen's This Is the End. Like when they do come back, it's the rapture. You get fucking Danny McBride fucking eating James Franco. I don't know. I just think, but it does have second coming vibes. That open-endedness. That's weird.
I mean, honestly, my first reaction. So like I've gone through a very interesting journey in my life where I was very religious. Not very religious. I was a free thinker as a child, and then
Spiritual.
So I grew up Catholic.
Right.
So I was looking for wisdom or any sort of knowledge about the world and everything, how everything worked.
And that's the first presented version of that.
That's the first thing that I encountered in life was Catholicism and religion.
But didn't you constantly feel that pushback between your own rational thinking and the nonsense they were throwing at you?
I think a little bit, but I think for me it was always
guilt.
I mean,
just the Catholic quip. I'm sorry, it's a meme. It's a meme.
I went to Catholic school, and so I went to a Jesuit school. So and these are the scholars of Catholic priests, basically. And there is like a very Christian apologetic, scientifically minded like strain there, where they're willing to accept science wholeheartedly, and just God is just beyond that, right? And I think that was kind of always my stance of like, however God set up the world is completely scientific, and everything is true, and we can explore it beyond, and then God is just behind the veil, right? And I think that's why these days I subscribe more to the Spinoza, Albert Einstein God of that. God is the universe in some way, right? Or and
well, we've talked about but it's the chicken or the egg problem too, though. But I do like the idea of some kind of deity having humble beginnings. Of like, if we were to ever advance to the point where we could manipulate space and time at our will, we would essentially be gods. But we had humble origins. That seems so much more likely than just poof. I'm Big Daddy. I'm here. I'm gonna make everything.
But wouldn't relatively speaking that be how it went? Because so actually, I looked up a little bit. So when talking about doing this podcast, I looked a little bit into all the movies we're going to talk about. But Contact was originally going to be a movie. Carl Sagan and Andrew Yin worked on the screenplay for the movie in 1979. Then the movie was stalled, so he wrote the novel instead, which is slightly different. And I decided not to read the book beforehand, just because there's a lot in the movie. And I think the movie is done really well. It eventually was made in 1997. But the book is a little different. I did read about what's some of the differences in the book. And in the book, there is a super intelligent species that she believes created the universe in some way. And they hid their messages in mathematics and things like that.
That's really trippy too. That's
so
cool.
There's that kind of like even a further kind of religious thing of like some other species, almost some intelligent species speaks through mathematics.
I just like how many centuries are we off like being able to like do that, like replicate or start something? I mean, like that's what I really think of. It's like in 1,000 years, I mean, we could probably culture out a planet, terraform it a little bit.
Well, not only that.
I mean, it might take 1,000 years. We start the domino effect, but I think we could design it out. I mean, that's where I'm.
But creating a planet is drastically different than the fabric of time and space.
Terraforming something is true. But
simulation.
I was about to go back to your simulation point.
We could easily, well, not easily, but with enough time and technology, it would be so much easier to create a simulation that is almost indiscernible from real life, and that's why it might be likely that we are in one.
I think a lot of those things. Sorry if you don't mind, but I think it's like the substrate of consciousness. You have to be able to like distill it out. Like it's got to be like altered carbon or something, right? Where you're centralizing consciousness separate from the anatomy, so that you can.
Well, we don't know what consciousness is, right? Like there is no understanding of what makes somebody conscious.
I do. I just don't want to share.
But the whole. I mean, have you heard the whole simulation theory? Yeah. Okay. So the idea is that basically it's another odds thing, right? Odds are we're in a simulation, just based on the odds. And personally, like as great as those odds are, it doesn't seem realistic to me.
Yeah.
Same.
But I lean
the best
on
argument
the idea.
Is how many years out do you feel like we are from making an indistinguishable simulation?
But the thing is,
that's the question.
No, but the simulation
we feel pretty close. God, that's spooky. That's it. That's it. It's the end of the argument.
It isn't a Matrix type simulation. This is we are almost digital. We are some digital form. So basically, it's like it's the World of Warcraft thing, right? The characters in World of Warcraft know they're a game, right? Like we don't know they have consciousness.
I don't really
obviously.
see how that's mutually exclusive from what I'm saying, though. Like I mean, like I think it's all the fucking same. Like that's what I mean. How far away are we from making a simulation that would be that indistinguishable? And it's like if it's that close, then somebody could have done it to us. And like I think that's kind of the way the logic train flies.
But we would have been created within the simulation. We would have been made of
simulation. But
one thing
it just seems like the principles
that I think is really fucking cool is that if we were in a simulation and we could find what's outside of it, I think the one concept of like Age of Ultron or the Ultron that I think just kind of, it's obvious in the movie, but you don't really conceptualize it, which is he was a non-physical thing that became sentient and built himself a physical form in our dimension. So we could conceivably do the same. If we were to find what's outside of the simulation and have some relationship with it, we could build ourselves a body that could interact in that quote-unquote real world, which is kind of trippy.
But Ultron already interacted with that world.
What do you mean? In terms of Jarvis and whatnot?
Yeah.
But he didn't have a physical body in that world. Like, if you had a Sims character and they were, like, sentient and they were, like, don't want to be confined to this box, they could do
But they don't know. They've never experienced anything outside. They don't talk to anything outside of the world.
Yeah, but I'm saying, let's say there was a...
It's almost as if God is talking to them, right?
Yeah. Right. But that kind of brings God down a notch, like
sure, yeah, totally,
and that's kind of how I see fucking if there was one, it's like he'd probably just be one of us, like it's just more advanced. Yeah. But I just think it's trippy. Like, what if there was a bug in the system that sim character was like, holy shit, I can interact with you now. I'm self-aware. And they're like, I'm not staying in this. I want to join the real world. It's just interesting to me that if we were a simulation, the prospects of jumping out of the simulation into whatever the real world would be, I think that's super trippy.
So I think for me, and coming back to like my own personal philosophical views, when I hear all these things, people talking about religion and science and all these other theories of things, to me, it's again an interpretation issue. Like we're all using different language to talk about the same problem and the same thing. So like
we're all searching for answers.
Yeah, and I think that like we can talk about simulation. And I find it useful to have a language because we have a very rich language when it comes to computers and simulations and things like that. But basically, what you're talking about is experiencing outside of our universe. To me, when you say something like that, like, and what is outside of this universe is we don't know, right? We don't know that it's another thing like this at all, right? And we don't know if it's a timeless place. We don't know anything about it. In the same way that the things inside, the World of Warcraft character doesn't know anything outside of the simulation, what it's like to be alive, because it's not alive, right? In any way that we understand alive being.
But is that because it's not advanced enough yet? If you could perfectly,
no, I think its very nature is embedded in the system.
Well, what do you mean?
But it has no.
You don't think if we could perfectly simulate the human brain, like, and for this point, I mean perfectly simulate it in a computer, wouldn't it react in the same way we react and want to and be aware of its situation? I think that it becomes a being
in our world.
Yeah.
Where it's like when it's in its world, it doesn't experience our world at all.
Yeah.
Except as inputs in the way that we experience mathematics and laws of physics and things like that. Like our world controls its world, but it does not interact with its world.
It was the scene in Age of Ultron. It's so weird when he comes out. He's like, oh, it's like I feel like I was in a dream. Like it's just so that transfer from the different mediums is kind of weird. But yeah.
I just think the simulation training that we use nowadays is kind of interesting. I mean, we use it for pilot training and military, firefighting, all that kind of stuff. I think that those, like they apparently are really good at what they do because it's sort of like full immersion and whatnot, and they get to like train through the stress. I think it's a net benefit, but as far as like, us being in a simulation and somebody else creating, I think it's really difficult to decide the framework because the physics could change in the other world. Like our math is, I understand what you're suggesting, right? That like all of ours is a designed set of math that could be radically different than ones on the outside. So that's like
but I think it
almost like a dimension argument, like a
exactly.
referred that way, right? Where we're moving into another sort of way of looking at the physics of the world, but we've got like pieces of that with like dark matter. We don't know really what it is or what functions in there.
Again,
there's so much in our universe we don't understand.
The one theory I've heard that's kind of interesting, and I'm not sure how popular this is, but the idea is that you have like essentially like our galaxy sits inside tubes that are like like plant tubes, and it's stemmed, but that affects our visual. So like we sit on the inside of one of these stems. Dark matter sits around it, but we are trying to guess the visual, but we are looking through actually a substrate of it. So it's sort of like looking through water or something.
Interesting.
There's like some math apparently behind it that checks it out, but the framework is just completely fucked up, and we just have no idea what we're looking at.
We have no way to conceptualize.
I mean, to me, it just seems like send the robots. Let's do it now so we can
get more data.
Like, exactly,
right?
You just gotta do it now, and then maybe if people are into it, let's start terraforming today.
Right.
And why wouldn't we? I don't really see. The only argument would be if there is bacteria, even on the smallest microscopic level, and we come in and like remove its chance, even if it takes 100,000 years for it to move into something even vegetative. Like that's probably it's a genocide in some sense. Like we have to think about it that way. And
all the
so I mean, at that level, like, we have to understand like how much of species or that we really, or like how much of organisms do we really respect. And I think that's a let's save COVID. Like we gotta, I mean, like how far do we go? I mean, it's a species, it's its own thing.
I think so it's inherently that we value our own life.
It's mindset, I guess. But I guess it is all about value. Yes.
Yeah.
At some point, right? But I think those are just interesting. Those aren't easy answers. They're not obvious, I don't think, all the time. So, but I mean, that's the biggest one that I can see being sort of potent, is that like if you start moving ships around, carrying bacteria between places and whatnot, space disease is an interesting concept, right? You introduce cultures, or at least our biology is essentially a carrier of bacteria. If you radically change its environment, there's like arguments that one would be that like global warming has a chance to increase tropical diseases, right? Because if you shift the entire biosphere a degree even, one, you got all these different cycles taking place, but it could cause, ecological devastation, takes down one. There's so many different pieces of it. You're kind of playing like a roulette game attached just by changing the environment. So I think space is a little more radical than a degree change on the planet, even though we consider that to be a big deal. So I kind of like that argument, but I would still terraform regardless. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's where I think science fails in some way, is because to some degree, everything is scientific and everything is natural, right? So it's like if a virus overtakes, or even if global warming continues, it's all happening according to scientific law, right? It's amoral in a certain way. And I think that's where humans have to come in and say what is worth doing and like why it's worth doing those things. And those are conversations that need to be had and not facts that need to be told. You know what I mean?
I just think there's lots of pros and cons. So it's difficult to I don't think they're like distilled truths immediately.
Right. Yeah.
They're like hashed out dialogues. I get it.
Yeah.
It's just it's easier said than done, man.
Yes.
Like,
Totally.
Completely.
Yes.
They should just put me in charge.
True.
What was that second question that you brought up?
There was two. I think we touched on one, but there was does scientific advances make us happier or more connected? And then there was if you could ask one question.
Oh, if you could ask one question. I never answered that.
That's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know. Think about that one for a month.
Yeah, I do feel like it ended up being a personal question. I think that's kind of what I was saying.
Was it good for you? That'd be my question. I never know.
I mean, I think it would be questions about their experience or their perception.
Yeah.
Like how do you perceive the world?
Right.
Because like the fact we just take sight for granted, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of where you experience the world. But I mean, like even in certain science fiction stories, where like different species have like
I would ask
mass or matter sensing organs rather than sight.
Who really killed JFK? That actually does bug me so bad.
Really?
Yeah, I want to know. Only because there is an answer.
Of course.
They're obviously.
Again, I do feel like it's like the answer is probably simpler.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm sure Lee Harvey Oswald had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So.
It just bugs me. Some of the weird thing is there are definitive answers to things we can never know, like how the universe really started. There is an answer to that. We just probably will never know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't think of anything.
There might also be one equation that explains the entire universe, but we have no way of understanding it. So it's like, what's the point of there being one?
Oh, yeah. But I would maybe ask them what the greatest mystery they themselves have solved would be, just because I think that would probably unfold a lot of answers that aren't asked. But yeah, I don't know.
I think keep it simple.
Any
advice seems like a good starting
advice,
point. Any advice, just keep it simple. But
is my haircut okay? Or if they sent a dude, it'd be like, so am I average? Is it? That's why they didn't send a dude. That's actually why they killed the first guy. But
second question.
It was the technology doesn't make us more disconnected, and I know. I think it's both.
I mean that's a real question these days, especially with social media and all the digital stuff going on that wasn't happening at that time. It's a very prescient question that they ask in the movie. I think it's interesting that it's asked by a religious person, because I don't think that's a very religious question these days. But I think it points at issues like that we have all the time that are just kind of, now we have a new way of understanding those same issues, right? Of like not really understanding each other, or trying to not being as connected, like, because there's no going back, right? There's never any going back. So there's more of just like, how do we contend with the fact that technology is doing this to us, and what can we do to make it better?
Yeah.
Again, it's like, what do we want this world to be, and how do we make the world we've created more like what we want it to be? Because there shouldn't be this I'm against the regressive, like, let's get rid of it, or like technology is evil. And I'm also against it's just going to happen, so wherever it takes us is where it goes.
Both extremes are not good. But I think it's both. I think if you compartmentalize your interaction with technology and not get sucked into the social media and all that stuff, then it can be very positive. But I also think when it's the only time in history where you could have a relationship, whether even if it's one-sided, like even through a podcast or something, with somebody on the completely opposite side of the world. You could resonate with them and feel the frequency from the completely different side of the planet.
So in a way, it's connecting us.
Yes, and then also, it's like a digital log of every mistake or progress that we made in history, and we could learn from those mistakes. And yeah, I think it's more connecting than disconnecting, but definitely has its drawbacks.
I think it's good. In general, mostly. The weird thing is that I think the movie is kind of at like I guess it's pretty timely, but I mean, I just think we've kind of transitioned to the information age is kind of the term I've heard thrown around, and I think it's true where big data runs everything, and a lot of capitalism today on fleek is basically manipulating or using the advantage of having large swaths of data to sort of, move the process forward. I can give like 15 examples of it, but I mean, the ones, all the big brands that we're aware of do that.
But even now, it's just data collecting, right? There's not a lot of data is being processed at this point.
Well, like I would use like the example of like Walmart inventory work. It's like probably sort of like the first predecessor of something that I really feel is successful because of big data. Because they've done such a good job of, looking at what consumers buy. Like when you go to different Walmarts, I mean, they are styled for the local area of consumers. I mean, when you go from the one in Coeur d'Alene, even to Post Falls, to the Valley, to the one in Spokane. I'm out in Cheney, so I'm looking over at Airway Heights. All of them really do. Ooh, nay,
but he's saying
sir.
Products,
they are located in product and pricing. Everything is designed. It's a big game, and I notice because I'm way too weird about when I'm buying stuff. I'll notice the price change, and I know there's fluctuations or individual stuff, but it really is based in the area of what's popular and like what'll be available there. But it's just smart business, right? I mean, it just makes a lot of sense why they would run it that way. But I think we obviously know other brands that are a little bit more conventional, more contemporary that do that kind of a thing. I don't think it's bad. I think it's better customer service. I think it's better for everything. But my only point is that I think the question's a bit of a distraction from this, because I think this is really what's making the decisions today. And I think a lot of the framework of new companies are using they have so much more potency, and it's just because the software can do the work of 10,000 individuals, like humans, right? Like if you were to put those people in jobs and make them do all of that, collect the inventory, make the decisions, sit in the meeting.
But I think that's exactly why it's bad. It's the cotton gin thing.
Well, there's that layer, then there's automation, which is a whole nother discussion to have, and I think that'll be more on fleek over the next couple decades.
It's nice that we have access to all this productivity, but it's like only one small group of people is.
There's pros and cons,
and it's like Walmart wiped out all of these mom and pop shops.
But Walmart's also suffering now
because some bigger, badder wolf came by and sucked everything
with
up.
big
but it's
data. Let's be clear.
But like all these mom and pop shops
with better data
had great customer service, but also very importantly, they were paying their individual fair share in taxes. And it's like you get we have heated conversations about this. It's like things like Walmart, and then after Walmart came Amazon. They're taking all the productivity and centralizing it and taking and so removing all those people from benefiting it, and they're the sole benefactors of all the progress that we're having. And then not only that, they're not paying any taxes, and so it's like none of that money is coming back to us in any manner. Right. It's just we're getting shit shipped to us faster.
Yeah, I mean, and those are real policy debates. I feel like my beef with what you're saying, not with what you're saying. What you're saying is true, right? And I agree with it. That it's very productive.
Just saying what I'm saying. Nothing crazy, man. I'm not here to die on the hill on it.
No. I think you're right in that the systems are working very well for a particular interest, right? And I'm not even worried about money when I'm talking about this right now. I think why can't we apply that sort of thing to a more productive, like social media digital experience, right? Like if we're able to use big data in such productive ways, why can't we apply it to like our quality of life as well as like our efficiency, right? Why does it always have to be about efficiency and not so much about like quality? I guess.
I think that we definitely work on that, right? So I think it's just the simple way that software is designed. So they have user experience versus user interface, so UI UX, and they're looking at, no more than 3 clicks from opening the app to get whatever it is out of the process, right? You want the
but it's also designed to keep you on it as long as possible,
right?
Which that's unhealthy.
I don't think that's true. Not all apps. I mean, social media apps are, but more of the consumer apps are not like. Airbnb is the one that I was like reading about recently, and it's like that's not someone spending hours on, but it's about the ease of the function of the service to the consumer good, right? And that, well, that's pretty democratized. It's letting people step into its own industry. I think it's not as.
Do you feel like
a little bit cleaner example?
Do you feel like people are being personally, like in their personalities, affected by digital media? Like, and I mean in the even entertaining Netflix and Twitter.
Bro,
and
I'm not, of course. Like, what? Like, absolutely. I mean,
I probably got a little bit of brain damage from watching Family Guy.
Yeah, I'm really beating around the bush on this question because I really am answering the positivity of data and software that is helpful.
I think that's kind of that's an inevitable thing, is how efficient
Will has
it's going to be.
Definitely drank the Bezos Kool-Aid.
Straight up. Dude, not even.
They're best friends.
Yeah, we are though. That's true. No, I just really like the. I like the concept that there are capacities for individuals in the society to go out and be successful, and then the quote that they'll use is just to push their worldview on the world. What the fuck is the purpose of doing it if that's not the case? And it's not to circumvent governments or anything, but you get to see the choices they make afterwards. And you can't
should we not bring up Hitler in that? It's
well,
he's somebody who pushed his worldview on everybody.
Yeah, but are you gonna go and are you really gonna complain about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? I mean, really, there's examples of this that aren't fucking insidious.
You can complain a little bit when they're fucking practicing vaccines on fucking underprivileged people in third world countries.
Yeah,
that's kind of gross.
and these are all
saving lives. I mean, big deal.
By sacrificing other lives.
Do it
they sterilize people and
you go do it then.
All right.
No, I get it. It's very
worse.
complicated.
There's way worse people being treated by their own structural governments today, which would be scary to talk about. I mean, you can go through a whole freaking litany of them.
I think my
I just disagree.
My stance is I think
Strong.
that technology these days, and I think it's always been the case that weak people, poor people, oppressed people, they're all at the whim of powerful people. And not that all powerful people are bad, not that all powerful people don't deserve the power they have or anything like that, just that a lot of people in the world are at the whim of other more powerful people.
For sure. And
I think we need to create systems that create a quality of life at least for the people who are at the whim of others. And I think I'm not against anybody having power. I'm not against anybody having money. I think as long as we're able to make sure that everybody else is also benefiting as well.
Yeah. But that's the thing. A lot of people who are in power are exponentially increasing their finances and power at the detriment to those below them.
We need to recreate the system where that's not the way it works. The society needs to be.
That's why Bezos
we all need to be
between
3 and 7 rather than 1 to 10 in terms of wealth and power. It's just tilt the scale a little bit, right? I feel like we've gone a little bit off topic.
Yeah, we definitely have. And I do have to pee so bad.
Okay.
So we should wrap it up a little bit.
So maybe I'll just kind of finish with one thought I had a little while ago. I'll bring it back and then you can respond and we can be done. Yeah. And it goes back to kind of the whole faith and science kind of duality in the movie, because I did watch this at a time where I was kind of struggling with that myself, because I grew up, again, like I said, I grew up Catholic, and I feel like I was a very good Catholic, like I said, and I tried to understand it as much as I could, and the thing that kind of turned me away was the people involved, right? It wasn't anything about, I didn't question the religion so much that it broke as much as I just saw so much hypocrisy within it that I didn't think. I just felt like there's something more useful out there. And I went through this whole phase, and I went this whole scientific phase of this scientific truth and knowledge, and I loved Carl Sagan for a long time, and I still do. And that kind of got me into philosophy after that, and it kind of just goes on, and you can always dig this whole deeper.
Yeah.
And I can't remember exactly when I first watching it, but I do remember initially sympathizing with Palmer Joss's character more so than Ellie's character.
Well, I was going to say it's because I have a similar Catholic but then transition to the science thing. It's almost like you start out as the Palmer, jump to Jodie Foster's, and then you meet in the middle as a Carl Sagan-esque kind of you're somewhere in the middle. Because I went hard to the other side after I dropped religion, and then that became a little irrational too.
Right.
So you have to kind of balance it out and find the happy.
And I think I watched it at a time when I was seeing so much scientific kind of dogmatism that I was a little it just seemed almost unhuman, in a very sterile sort of way that I was kind of reacting against that. And I really thought the movie did a really good job of bringing it all back to this very human element of our personal experiences and the faith we have in the world and the faith we have in each other, and what makes things real, and what we're all searching for, and being able to thread those needles, right?
Yeah. And the same, I can't unbind my spirituality from my early years. So I kind of think of it the same way you do, where it's science up until God takes it from there, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Or at least I want to be proven that that's not the case. So I kind of always subconsciously
I'm agnostic
that way.
I'm a very I'm agnostic in a non-indifferent way. I'm a not aggressive agnostic, but I'm an active agnostic.
I'm a little aggressive agnostic, but it's just. Why start from a point that you can't prove? Why start saying, I know there's a God? It's that whole argument. You can't prove that there's a
That's the conceit, right? That's the problem with Ellie's character, is she believes that you can prove everything. And I think he asks her, that's a very good question, and we haven't said this yet, is when she says that I need proof for God. There needs to be some shred of proof. And he asks her, do you love your dad? And you know she does, right? And she knows she does. And he says, prove it. Yeah. Right? And it's that's something you could never prove.
Yeah. You know? I'm okay with the question being left unopened and never answered, or left open and never answered. I don't think it makes any sense to just put forth, I know there's a God, and I have, it's I don't know. I think if we were to
people could know. I mean, in the way that you know science is real, right?
I think they delude themselves into saying they know.
But how do you know science is real?
Because we have microphones and rocket ships and cars and all this stuff that is tangible evidence of, and I'm not saying.
Because what if we learn tomorrow? Because we had Newtonian physics for a long time, and then everything flipped, right? Yeah. And we now know that quantum physics collapses into Newtonian physics, but it's that whole conception of the world is finite in its applicability.
Yeah.
Right? So it's
but it's still applicable.
Right, and is not his faith and belief in God not applicable? Is believing there's something greater? Is believing there's a higher power or some order to the universe not an applicable
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with believing for the potential of that existing. I have a problem with people saying they know for sure, because you don't know. You can say you know, but I'm calling your shit. You don't know.
I think people have personal experiences. It's tough. I've heard a lot of testimonial shit as I've grown up, so I find that one difficult.
About ghosts, and I'm like, you're a dummy. I'm sorry. I know I'm an asshole right now.
It's body chemistry,
but
I guess after going through the movie and seeing the flip between Ellie and
Am I missing the whole last?
I feel like you're still too virulently attacking.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think I have such PTSD with religion.
Sure.
It was so thrown on me, and again, you have no idea how many, as a 5th grader, arguments with my religious teachers, child's minds have such rational thinking. They don't jump to ridiculous notions. It's only when they're pushed on them that they get indoctrinated into those beliefs. So when you're at a young age and you're hearing these things like the blood of God and he died for you and all this shit, you're pushing against it the whole time. And it's only if they break you that you become indoctrinated. And it's I'm so pissed off about that, because I am appreciative of the moral foundation that it gave me, because I think there is something to religion like that until it gets wacky. But I would have had a much rational framework for my view on, if I was indoctrinated hard in science at that young age, I feel like I would have such greater potential for understanding the way the world works. And it came so much later. Sure. It's I feel like you're really damaging your child if you're just
raising somebody in religion isn't really teaching them how to live in the world
or understand any of it.
But I do think I think certain religious people lose sight of the applicability of religion, right? And certain people really understand its place and know how it works for them, and some people don't. And pushing anything on anybody, I think, is not a good idea. Yeah. And showing them the benefits is good. But that's why I also feel like arguing against somebody that's religious is also not very helpful.
Yeah.
Helpful stance to take.
I have, for the most part, you have no idea the hours of conversations with my family.
Oh, you and I fucked with it for 3 hours over the last couple of weeks, even, at least intermixed. So
it's just I don't believe in any woo-woo shit. There's no ghosts. There's no like
I think I think this is the problem, is that you get so hung up on the language people use that you like don't allow any sort of like unknown.
What's another way to what's a version of a ghost that could be
just like latent energy, or like energy spikes, or any sort of like
so many different weird ways to explain
cosmic
it.
whatever. Like it could be anything.
That's where I'm at.
Right?
It's like
or even
like 20 different ways this could be true.
We can get into this more in Interstellar, but there are very human ways that ghosts can be experienced by people too. Okay, last thing I want to say, because it was a point in the movie that I did want to bring up, is when she's just viewing the center of the galaxy or whatever it is, and she says she has no words for explaining it, and she says a line that I feel like people understand, because there's this whole saying that kind of goes around it, but she says that they should have sent a poet.
And
I think
like
that's
that
very I think that's a bit of a surrender for her, in that she is unequipped in her scientific mind to really accept the enormity and the grandeur of the universe. And I think it calls back to kind of the creative aspect to life and the universe, that like some things are just inexplicable and break all sort of.
I do remember listening to like Star Talk Radio, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson podcast with like Bill Nye. He's like, it's important to send musicians and authors and poets and all that, because they have a non-strictly rational way of describing things, and that translates to more people than just the data, you know,
in the way that movies and things connect to people more than like books on thinking and philosophy and science.
People like analogy.
Yeah.
Religion's built on parable. Turns out.
Exactly. They just use a different language, right? Cool. Well, thanks for talking about the movie. That was a very robust discussion.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was super fun.
Thanks for having me. I had too much fun.
I actually found out that while they made Contact, they watched 2001: A Space Odyssey as inspiration.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good to know. Good to know.
We can talk about that one next time.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Maghouse out.
Thanks.
It's not a thing. It's not happening.